The story begins in a world where, without a prince to help break the spell, the princess will sleep forever. The beauty will forever remain young and pure, as she is in her dreams, and her brother Yugue will do everything to save her. She will stay away from the terrible events of the world, and will become loved by someone without knowing it. All this happened for a reason, since there was a certain witch who contributed to this. Everything happened exactly as the 12th witch, who looked like a charming blonde, wished. The nurse was alone with the patient, but suddenly, the patient's brother entered the room with flowers, who came to visit. The young man who came in was extremely embarrassed, and he asked Sister Jean Ji if this was really how she checked patients. The girl smiled sweetly at the young man and said that this was not at all what he was thinking about. She immediately got up from the medical bed in order to have a dialogue with the guy and explain everything to him. Jean Ji said that she had just finished examining his sister Xiao Meng, and it turned out that all her indicators were normal. But at one point, in a not very confident voice, the nurse said that there was one thing. The young man asked her if the patient's consciousness had never returned, and Jean was silent for the first few seconds. In the end, she said that this is the effect of vanishing soul syndrome, more of a peculiar process than a disease. 5 years ago it was discovered that every fifth person lost consciousness overnight, and it looked very strange. People closed their eyes one after another, falling to the ground unconscious. Such a sight was very frightening. Jean said that even modern technologies will not help cure this pathology, they can only try to preserve the body. The young man sat on his knees by Xiao Meng's bed, looking into nothingness in frustration. The young man said that there was no problem with waiting, and the monitor at that moment showed Xiao Meng's general condition. The hero's look was still upset, something indescribable was happening in his soul, and in his hands he was holding a bouquet of flowers. He emphasized that every time fewer and fewer people believe in awakening, hope begins to fade. Jean said that it's not easy for him either, and all the nurses see it, because they even remembered his clothes, but the guy smiled after her words. The nurse put the bouquet presented by the young man aside so that it would not interfere, but the hero only cast an emotionless glance. At one point he said that he would be on his way and reached for the bouquet of flowers that she had placed on the table. The young man's actions put Jean in a slight stupor, because she did not understand what was going on. When leaving, the young man said that he did not want to leave the flowers to wither, so he would take them with him. He said that if Xiao Meng opened his eyes one day and saw withered flowers, he would definitely be upset. Within a few seconds, a guy in black boots crossed the threshold of the room, preparing to leave the building. Coming out of the room, the young man froze in place for a moment, thinking seriously. He stood firmly on his feet, and his legs were motionless for some time. He was wearing black sneakers. The young man put his hand into the bouquet, as if intending to take something out of it, and his face was still serious. In the end, from the very bottom of the bouquet of flowers, the guy took out a tiny video camera. He immediately used it to look at all the video materials that she managed to record. In one of the video fragments, Nurse Jean entered the room where Xiao Meng was lying. The nurse slowly crept up to Xiao, who was endlessly sleeping, and her intentions were unknown. After just a few seconds, she approached the sleeping patient and leaned slightly towards her. Jean reached her hand towards Xiao Meng's chest, intending to do something with it, and lightly pulled the girl's jacket over herself. Suddenly, the camera captured a strange bright yellow color emanating from Xiao Meng's chest. Finally, the video ended, which made the young man breathe a sigh of relief. He began to press buttons, trying to understand what happened there, and these thoughts did not give him peace. Yugue looked at the monitor screen, continuing to try to unravel Jean Ji's incomprehensible actions. In a moment, he began to type something on the keyboard in order to find at least some clue in this video. For several minutes, Yugue reviewed fragments of the video, trying to understand the essence of the nurse's action. 29-year-old Jean Ji is the head nurse at the 5th hospital in Xiaoqing district. No one knows what she did before taking office, and it is a real mystery. Jing Ji's character is gentle and kind, her behavior is dignified and decent, and the girl herself treats patients well. The head nurse of the 5th hospital is more attentive to female patients and helps them a lot. The young man suggested that she had some kind of abilities, and they were apparently related to healing. Abilities are not uncommon in their world. For every 1,000 people there is one individual with a different kind of skill. But still, throughout history there have only been a few people capable of healing, and this ability cannot be compared with others in power. And the principles of its action go beyond what modern medicine can explain, because it is more like a miracle. The growth of severed limbs, the healing of incurable diseases, and even the return of souls. But the guy was trying to understand why Jin Ji secretly uses his abilities on Xiao Meng, and why the girl is not getting better. At one point, a thought came into Yu Gui's head, and he wondered if everything was as he thought. He assumed that there were some problems with her revival, but told himself that in any case, he couldn't leave things like that. But Yu also realized that everything would be completely different if he managed to learn healing abilities from her. The young man's mind was clouded with all sorts of thoughts, and he saw various fragments of his life around him. Gui closed his eyes tightly and saw Jin Ji and Xiao Meng in front of him, and how the nurse used her abilities. After 10 years of calm, the young man again had to make a deep dive. Yu Gui was inside a transparent blue sphere that protected him from the water. The main character still did not open his eyes, and asked himself the question of whether he was sure of his actions. At that moment, air stopped flowing into the young man's lungs, and he opened his eyes wide in horror, realizing that he was suffocating. The hero was alone with gray and terrifying memories that haunted him. Yu narrowed his eyes and remembered that 10 years ago he made a promise to himself. He promised himself that even if he could not atone for all the sins he had committed, he would definitely not open this door. But now, 10 years later, Yu Gui thought completely differently. Before his eyes was the beautiful Xiao Meng. The guy said that now it doesn't matter to him what punishment he will suffer, since he is ready for anything. The young man realized that now there was only one thing left for him, and this method was not at all easy. Yu Gui will have to make concessions and find the key to salvation, because his goal is to get into her body. After making a deep dive, some time passed, and the young man began to open his eyes. The hero was lying in the children's room, and the sun was shining brightly through the window, warming with its rays. Yu tried to understand where he was. The young man tried to come to his senses and wondered if this was really a deep dive. Gui turned his gaze to the mirror standing next to the bed and found a girl with white hair there. His pupils widened in surprise as he was in the body of an adorable girl with red eyes. The girl was wearing a luxurious black dress with red patterns, and she herself was writing something in her diary. Yu Gui decided to test the cute girl's body and got up from the table where the girl was sitting. He immediately began to wave his arms from side to side in order to familiarize himself with the body a little and get used to it. Little Jin's legs were crossed, since the guy was not able to control his body the first time. But still, after a few seconds, Yu said that it seemed like it worked, but he didn't expect it to come back so far. This whole situation alarmed the young man, and he was a little ashamed, since he had become a child. The hero had not resorted to a deep dive for a long time, and must have forgotten everything, because nothing like this had ever happened. The young man in the girl's body screamed and wondered how he had become a little girl in the first place. The first level skill is deep diving, and through the subconscious you can transfer your soul into the body of another person. A person will retain his personality and will be able to freely play the role of another person, consciously changing the past. And besides all this, a person has the opportunity to even completely change the current reality. Yu Gui told himself that such air quality and sunlight obviously could not be found in their city, most likely it was a large city. The guy also said that in terms of character, he had never seen Sister Jean outside the hospital even once. But, apparently, she is from a rich family, and the hero was looking at a happy childhood photograph of his sister. He couldn't imagine what she had to face in the past since she ended up in their lower-class town. Suddenly, Yu Gui, in the body of a little girl, caught his finger on a nail sticking out of the frame. He looked at the wounded finger with interest and told himself that now was the time to try. The young man plucked up courage and decided to use the healing to heal the wound. But Jean turned out to be too small for this skill, and Yu decided to just go with the flow until he gained the ability to heal. He had a desire to read books about medicine, but then he told himself that the girl was still too young for this. Little Jean Ji didn't want to study at all, but she really wanted to play, because the weather outside was very good. Yu Gui realized that the deep dive went well enough, so he was able to control his body. If he ignores the will of the original owner, the consequences may be irreparable. The hero also realized that in any case, no one should guess his true identity. Jin Ji decided to go outside to play. the little girl's diary remained open and lay on the table in her room. The palace in which little Jean Ji lived was huge in area, and there was a long red carpet in the corridor. Yugue in the girl's body looked down from the porch and found that there was no one downstairs, so there was an opportunity to go out. Someone walked quickly behind the girl, which made her wary. With excitement, her heart began to beat faster, and with sweat on her face, she turned around to find out what was the matter. Little Jean Ji looked and thought, perhaps it was Sister Anna who was watching her. Yugue in the little girl's body also said to himself that it seemed like someone had really passed through. Jean Ji came out from behind the wall, and in front of her on the wall hung a huge portrait of a man whose gaze was stern. The astute Yugue immediately realized that behind the huge portrait there might be a hidden button leading to another room. In the girl's body, he moved the picture aside and pressed the red button hiding behind it. A door opened in front of the girl, leading down the gloomy room along the steps. She decided to overcome herself and go down the steps, because she was very curious. The smell that enveloped the room seemed very strange to Yugue, and he told himself that something was clearly wrong here. Drops of sweat ran down Jean Ji's face, and the guy told himself that the situation was a little different than he had imagined. Finally, the girl went down to the end of the steps and heard someone's voices behind the wall, which made her stop. She realized that it was Sister Anna and Uncle Lo, who were discussing among themselves the success of the operation. The uncle told his sister that he was very worried, but she calmed him down, saying that there was no one in the corridor either. Law told Anna that since this was her first time doing this, he could give her some advice since he had accumulated a lot of experience. Jean Ji ran her fingers over the table, and Yugue said to himself that there was no dust. However, they were clearly not here for cleaning. He was deeply puzzled by this question, and still could not find a worthy answer to it. Suddenly, out of fear, little Jean Ji's eyes opened wide, and she looked at the horrors that the adults were doing. The girl watched as her uncle and sister Anna performed a strange operation on a person. Little Jean Ji sweated, realizing that their patient was Adric, and realized that the lady needed a new teacher. The girl fell to the floor and covered her head, realizing the horror of the situation, while suffering from memories. Her memories were of how one day Adric came and said that from today on he would teach her instead of Carl's teacher. He said that he understood her feelings, but he needed to try to start studying. Yugue understood that these were Jin's memories. Jean Ji's face was shrouded in horror, and she did not understand at all what was happening to her. As she took a few steps back, she suddenly stepped on someone's foot with her heel and stopped. At that same second, the girl turned around to find out who was standing behind her, and her gaze was frightened. Behind Jean Ji stood a tall blonde man in a medical gown, and the girl was terribly scared, because she realized that it was her father. A resident of one of the apartments poured her drink into the trash while standing on the balcony. The liquid poured over the garbage bags lying in the trash can, where there was a strong stench. Yugue, meanwhile, opened his mouth and widened his eyes as he was out of breath and his face was shrouded in panic. The young man lay on the floor, not at all understanding what had happened to him, and tried to breathe. After a few seconds, he finally came to his senses and in his thoughts told himself that he had been thrown out. Yugue decided to take a shower to fully recover and reflect on what happened to him. He, of course, had assumptions regarding Sister Jin's mysterious past, but the actual development of the event was different. Considering that he acted based on her wishes, perhaps she actually witnessed this event in the past. After some time, Yugue finally finished taking the water procedures and turned off the water. He came out of the shower stall and threw a light towel over himself, getting ready to go and rest. There is too little information yet, so Yugue is not sure that it is already possible to start studying healing. Suddenly, someone began to break into the young man's house, asking if he was at home. Yugue realized that it was Landlady Anderson and immediately began to put on a t-shirt, because he understood that she had come for money. The earnings from his part-time job are not even enough to cover his debts to pay for treatment, so he had to take out a loan. Yugue began to sweat as it was not just Landlady Anderson standing in front of him. Several thugs were holding the door, and the young man said to himself that things were bad. A crowd of thugs immediately attacked the young man, planning to put him on the floor. A few seconds later, Yugue was already lying on the floor, and calmly told the thugs that he would explain everything to them. But they were not going to listen to the guy's stories, and one of them sprayed his face with a spray can. The young man lost consciousness, but after a while he woke up, which surprised the scumbag. One of the bandits asked Brother Yu if he understood why he was here and in this state. Yu Gui, while expiring, then told his brother that he needed to wait until his silver key was carried from there. But no one was going to listen to the young man's stories, as a result of which he was given a slap in the face. The bandits immediately began to mock the guy and suggested that they look at what color his trousers were. The main scumbag said that he is not interested in men, so there is absolutely no point in looking at his trousers. He also said that in addition, he does not have any evidence of how much Yu Gui can return. One of the bandits, holding a knife in his hand, asked the young man if he knew what this code word meant. At one point he stuck out his long tongue, loudly declaring that he knew better than anyone about kidneys. 100 meters away from them could be seen the luminous silhouette of a girl, standing still and watching what was happening. The bandit with the long tongue was about to stab Yu Gui, who owed them huge sums of money. The young man's face at that moment was incomprehensible, and his emotions were absolutely mixed. The girl with dark blue hair said that it would be a mistake to shed so much blood because of this, so she will help him. But with a slight grin, the beauty added that she would do it for a reason, but with interest. One of the bandits said that this was Meng's lawyer, and he sensed that she was already aware of all the events and would soon be here. He also said that she was the only one doing business here under her own name, but Meng replied that she was just lucky with the people she knew. She also said that with money everything is solved much easier, but the bandit said that this is true, but there are some things he doesn't understand. He said that considering Brother Yu Gui's connections, how could this no one cross paths with her, and is there really something he doesn't know? The lawyer approached the young man hanging upside down and put both hands on his head. The bandit asked not to look at him like that, because there were several good moments. It wasn't the nights 10 years ago that frayed his nerves. Lawyer Meng put her mouth to Yu Gui's ear, asking the silent youth if this was so. After some time, the young man was released, after which they went for a walk. The evening city was bright and colorful, and young people slowly strolled along its streets. Lawyer Meng bought 2 cans of soda so she could drink and talk, but the shy Yu Gui thanked her and refused, to which the girl said that she had given all 200,000 yuan. The guy said that he didn't want to take it, but Xiaomeng was in a hopeless situation, and promised to find a way to return the money. The lawyer said that he could have asked her earlier, but chose to go to him without even contacting her. The blue-eyed girl asked if in his memories she was still that cheerful and at times uncontrollable girl. Yu Gui asked her not to say that, because today she came to his aid. It was not easy for her to stir up the past. The girl crossed her legs, while lightly tapping her heel on the asphalt. Adjusting her jacket, the lawyer said that longing for the past had absolutely nothing to do with it. Moreover, the money that she gave Wu Tiao for him today will return to her in a different form in a maximum of half a month. Yu Gui almost emotionlessly said that he understood everything and asked what role he plays in her script. Meng said that for the past few years, since the incident with Xiao Meng, he has been constantly going to the hospital. Yu asked how this applied to Xiao Meng, but the girl asked him not to worry and said that she was only interested in the hospital. She said that he could perceive this money as a reward, and she needed his help in investigating a case. The lawyer began her story to the young man that the whole thing is in the hospital where Xiao Meng is. She said that some kind of secret organization was operating in that hospital, and it was Wu Tiao's brother. At the end, the lawyer stunningly said that a secret organization was illegally selling corpses. Yu Gui threw the white paper wrapper on the ground, preparing to put on the mask he took out from there. The young man began to put a pink mask with cute pictures on his face, thinking about Meng Jishu in his thoughts. The girl asked him to hide his wounds, otherwise his face was swollen, he was too conspicuous. Yu Gui began to walk along the streets where the bandits committed their outrages, and called this world strange. One of the bandits hit the man, whose body was covered in bruises, with her heel and ordered him to get out of here. She saw a guy passing by and asked displeasedly if he really thought he could leave unscathed if he had already gotten to her. The beaten man grabbed Yu Gui by the leg and begged him to lend him money, but the guy said that he shouldn't have brought himself to this point. He told himself that in chess the worst choice for both sides was to give up a move to see what the other did. He also told himself that although this was absurd, even such scenes were not uncommon in their reality. Yu Gui desperately told himself that they would never be able to atone for their sins. Walking down the street, he heard the screams of bandits, and at one moment he lowered his desperate gaze. A girl with charming long gray hair that fluttered in the wind ran up to him. She ran up to Yugoi and clung to him, because she was very scared, because the bandits did not spare anyone. The guy looked into her eyes and was about to say something, because she seemed familiar to him. The blue-eyed sweet girl looked at the guy in disbelief with tears in her eyes. Yugoi silently looked into her eyes, without planning anything negative in her direction. Tears were flowing down the girl's cheeks, and her gaze was extremely incredulous towards the guy. She immediately rushed away so that no one could catch up with her, and Yugoi looked at all this in bewilderment. The bandits were searching the street because it was important for them to find the girl, but one of them realized that she seemed to have run away. The gray-haired man nervously asked where she could have gone and said that the girl was as impudent as her mother. He saw Yugoi passing by and boldly asked him if he had seen a girl here. Yu pretended that he did not know which girl he was talking about, but the man said that she looked 15 years old and had big eyes. When the girl's age became known, Yugoi asked the man how this was possible and whether he was crazy. He told the bandit that if he found her, he would give him a 50% discount, but the man refused his offer. At the end, he also asked what kind of mask was on the guy's face, but Yu asked what was wrong with that, and what was wrong with the fact that he loved babies. The trio of bandits continued to move forward, and their leader ordered to look for the girl, because she could not go far. Yugoi quietly told the girl that she could come out of hiding since they had already left. But the girl didn't come out and the guy decided to look into the trash can and realized that she had left. He put his hands in his pockets and began to walk away, calling her a wild, wounded cat, while she secretly watched him from around the corner. The blue-eyed sweet girl desperately wiped away her tears because she didn't know what to do next. The bright moon reflected in her bottomless eyes, and tears of despair and hopelessness flowed down her cheeks. The night flew by unnoticed, and the next morning Yugoi was in the hospital. Jinji was treating his ear, and the guy was twitching and asking her to be easier, because he was in pain. The sister said that he was such an adult, but he simply couldn't stand the pain, but Yu just held his ear. Jin applied an antiseptic pad to him, saying that he was clearly far from Xia Meng. Yugoi thanked Sister Ji for saving him money on treating his wounds. Jin asked if he got involved in something dangerous in order to cover expenses, and the guy replied that in any case, it would not be easy. Yu inquired about her income and asked if her salary was enough, because for nurses it is not particularly high. Jin Ji continued to go about her business with a smile, and Gui asked if she lived alone and if she needed to help her parents. She replied that they earned enough and asked why he decided to find out about her, because he usually only cares about his sister. Yugoi said that he wanted to know more about her, because she helps his sister, and he doesn't even know how best to thank her. But Jinji simply smiled and answered the young man that there was no need for thanks. Suddenly, it was announced that a general inspection of the hospital would be conducted by Chief Jiang, who was already heading to the offices. The nurses rushed in all directions as they had to respectfully greet the venerable leader. Chief Jiang walked past the nurses with a serious face, holding a folder with important documents in his hands. He stopped at the bed where Sister Xiao Meng was lying, and Yugoi addressed him politely. Jiang said if she had been suffering from vanishing soul syndrome for 5 years, and Jean said that was the case and transferred her to them a year and a half ago. Yugoi asked the head if his sister would recover, to which he replied that the indicators were normal, but we needed to prepare for the worst. Jinji looked at the men shaking hands and said no. They looked at her in bewilderment, but she said with a smile that she would not allow her patient's well-being to worsen. Yugoi wondered in his mind what was going on, because it felt like Sister Jean was trying to get Jiang's attention. There were many hospital staff outside the door who wanted to talk to Chief Jiang. Sister Jean Ji silently looked out the window, observing the beauty of nature, and thinking about life. She placed her palm on the window and told Yugoi that he had been waiting for 5 years, so he should not give up hope so easily. Even if they ever report that Xiao Meng's vital signs have deteriorated, he shouldn't take it to heart. At one point, she turned her gaze to Yugoi, and in a serious voice asked him not to sign. The young man looked at her, after which Jin Ji said that it was impossible to sign a consent form for the transfer of remains for research. She looked into Yugoi's eyes with a sincere smile, as if she had not said anything to him a few seconds ago. The young man's gaze was half surprised, and half not understanding the situation. Yu recalled how the lawyer asked him to help conduct an investigation, and realized that everything was interconnected. The girl with long ears continued to run in the sweat of her brow, because she was afraid to stop. She was very out of breath and told herself that she was still being followed, so she couldn't stop. The girl moved her legs non-stop, afraid to stop even for a split second. She felt that the indescribable creature was still here, and it continued to haunt her. But she could not find the reasons for this, and simply looked back in horror to make sure that it was still there. As she ran, she wondered if this was one of the customers she had laughed at. She also wondered if it was a murderer sent by those whose transaction she happened to witness. Assumptions entered her head in an endless stream, but at one moment she still stopped and hid behind the wall. She looked back and told herself that the monster had disappeared and wondered if she had really managed to break away. The out-of-breath girl said it looked like she had a blast and decided she would no longer return home from work alone. The girl continued to walk forward along the dark street, while saying that it was very dangerous in the Xiaoqing area that night. The next morning, the weather was gray and there was an investigation outside the motel. A black and gloomy crow took slop from a torn garbage bag into its beak, standing on a crumpled tin can. One of the police officers said that the victim was a woman whose registration information was not available. He also added that the records indicate the name Lai Di, and the age of 20 full years. The stern investigator, holding a smoldering cigar in his hands, said that most likely she was 16 years old. The policeman asked how he knew whether he had determined by the development of secondary sexual characteristics or the pubic bone. The squad leader, Wang Nanchao, replied that they were simply cheaper than 18-year-olds, and it was much easier to control them. The young employee said that the deceased had no obvious injuries, but many bruises, and the cause of death was hemorrhagic shock. He said that it seems that every time the devil specifically hunts down special women. The young policeman also said that in this case, he had a couple of questions, but received a slap on the head from the commander. Wang Nanchao said that no matter how low the victim has fallen, it is not a reason to condemn him, especially at such a time in the Xiaoqing area. The commander narrowed his eyes sternly and said that there was someone who really should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. With eyes red with rage, he said that this is the main character who made the world what it is. Two policemen saw something strange and exclaimed that there was something else, thereby attracting the attention of the squad leader. Wang Nanchao turned around and began to walk towards them, wondering if there was still a victim. Beads of sweat were running down his face because he was very nervous, but he could see that the girl was not dead yet. A sweet blue-eyed girl in a short dress was fast asleep on the grass, and the commander understood this. He decided not to disturb her and let her sleep for a while, but after a while the girl woke up from the rays of the sun. She slowly opened her bottomless blue eyes, trying to understand what was happening around her. The girl was stunned, because there were people around her unknown to her, and she became very wary. Squad leader Wang Nanchao handed her a bottle of water and asked if everything was okay, and also offered her a drink of water. He was embarrassed and said that he didn't know if it was because of the terrible reputation of the police in the area, or if he just didn't inspire confidence. He said that in any case, she should know that if she meets someone like him, nothing bad will happen. The girl stood up and asked to be left alone, because she had drunk so much just last night. Wang Nanchao said that she was lucky because there was a killer in the area, and in his thoughts he said that she looked younger than the previous victim. He told the girl that she should be careful not to go out late at night so that her parents would not be nervous. His words about home and parents touched the girl, and gritting her teeth, she was about to say something to Wang Nanchao. The detachment commander was very serious at that moment, and the girl said that she had neither a home nor parents. In her thoughts, she remembered the past and told herself that if not for that incident, she would probably have been the same height. The policeman said that he could contact social workers if she was an orphan, but the girl screamed that she would not go anywhere. When she was about to run away, Wang Nanchao grabbed her hand tightly, preventing her from running away. His action shocked the girl, and she screamed for him to let her go and let her go. Wang Nanchao said that she could take care of herself and asked if she simply lacked the temporary desire. He looked into her eyes sincerely, instilling confidence and showing her that he could be relied upon. The sweet blue-eyed girl shed a tear, looking into the eyes of the squad leader, as if realizing that she could trust him. Wang Nanchao let go of the cute girl's hand, and she tried to move it because her hand was a little stiff. She didn't pay so much attention to the hand, because she was thinking about trust in the policeman. The girl still moved her fingers, after which she was able to straighten her palm normally. Van wrote the address on his palm and said when she would come, "Then I must go to my aunt on the 3rd floor and say that it is from Shaowan." The girl did not waste time and went to the specified address. She introduced herself to Nanchao as Tao Hualing. After some time, Tao arrived at the indicated address, once again checking it against the inscription on her palm. As she walked up the stairwell, Hualing wondered if she could really trust that policeman. She recalled how the man told her that she and Uncle Tsayu had been friends for decades, so he would definitely not offend her. These memories brought pain to the girl, and she told herself that at that time she had heard a lot of such promises. The only difference is that every touch made her immediately feel unwell, but this was not the case when she met the policeman. Tao Hualing decided to try first, and if something went wrong, she would simply run away. She continued to climb the steps, when suddenly she smelled a pleasant and alluring aroma of food. The aroma seemed to turn her head and she paused for a few seconds to enjoy it, because she was hungry. Tao couldn't keep walking and told herself that she smelled like steamed buns with shiitake mushrooms added to them. Hualing said that no one cares about the feelings of someone who hasn't eaten for 2 days, and she shouldn't have refused the policeman's bread. Suddenly, the door next to which the girl was standing opened, and Yugui came out with steamed buns in a bag. The young people looked into each other's eyes, stunned as they recognized each other. Tao Hualing immediately rushed up the stairs because she was very scared of Yugui. The young man looked after her without a word, not quite understanding why she was so afraid of him. After a while, Tao Hualing's legs got tired, so she decided to rest for a while. Tears flowed from her eyes, and wiping them away, she could not understand what was the matter and why everything was like this. Hualing sat down on the floor and realized that he again had some strange feeling inside him that was haunting her. She remembered Yugui's face and said that this man exuded a familiar aura of kindness. His face was exactly preserved in her memories with and without the mask, so Tao said that she could not be mistaken. She told herself that it was definitely him last night, the kind man in the child's mask. Anderson told Tao Hualing that Xiao Wang is not like everyone else, and although he does not return here to live, he pays the rent every month. The girl felt awkward and sat silently, looking away, while her aunt tried to remember what she wanted to say. In the moment, she said that you can't have pets and asked if she was raising a cat, to which Tao answered no. Anderson also asked her to always close the doors, since their area was far from calm. She looked worriedly into the girl's eyes, because she really wanted the troubles to pass her by. Tao Hualing looked into her aunt's eyes with special care and memorized everything she said. Yugui asked if Anderson had had dinner and suggested trying his fresh buns. The lady asked if Xiao Yu was okay and said that she received death threats last night, so she had no choice. Yugui smiled and said that everything was fine, and he had talked to them, so they wouldn't cause her any more trouble. The young man put the buns on a plate and asked what the new girl's name was, to which the girl introduced herself as Tao Hualing. Yugui held the fragrant bun in his tongs, asking the girl if she wanted to try his creation. He is confident in himself, because his sister was a picky eater, and for good reason, because Anderson praised the young man's wonderful buns. Tao Hualing felt awkward, but she still took Yugui's bun and was about to taste it. The girl's bottomless blue eyes opened wide after taking a bite, because the buns tasted great. Tao's cheeks flushed a little with pleasure, and Yugui with a smile asked her to take her time and eat slowly. Hualing tried to say something to the young man, and Yu said that he would leave the plate of buns for them, because he had more at home. The girl was slowly eating a fragrant bun, and Xiao Tao appeared before her eyes for a moment. The generous Yugui smiled and told the sweet girl that from now on they would be neighbors, but the girl was very thoughtful at that moment. In her head, she was sitting on a leather sofa, asking him to take care of her, while the guy was standing next to the sofa. After some time, Yugui was at home, slowly eating a homemade bun. He was eating a bun and asked Xiao Meng what they were talking about earlier while talking to her via video call. Xiao, holding a glass of red wine, said that she also wanted to try the buns and asked them to send them to her. She said that Yugui was talking about the head of the hospital, Jiang Qi, as well as the nurse who always takes care of the patients. The guy said that her name was Jean Ji. She didn't say it directly, but she very clearly hinted that there were certain problems in the hospital. Xiao Meng asked if he suspected that the head was doing shady things, to which Yu Gui said that he had very little information. The girl asked him to try to get closer to the head, and the young man asked how he could do this. Xiao Meng sarcastically said that his charm could help him, and Yu Gui asked her to go away. The girl crossed her legs and said that he could do otherwise, the decision was up to him. In the end, she said that she only needed the results of the study, and as soon as possible. Yu Gui just lowered his gaze emotionlessly and said to himself that, as he thought, it would no longer be possible to leave the game. In the city, nothing has ever been free for the lower class, because everyone is trying to make money off of someone. The reason they chose him is because they expected him to use deep dive from the start. Yu Gui told himself that as the situation shows, he has no other choice, and if Sister Jingji is being manipulated, he must deal with it. In the end, he realized that he could solve everything on his own and told Xiao Meng that he would do everything. Yu Gui stood up from his computer desk and told himself that this was just one of the side missions for him. He called it a side mission because there were more important things than this. Memories flooded back to the young man, and he was literally enveloped in them for some time. Tao Hualing suddenly woke up and began to look at the ceiling in fear, because she did not understand anything. She said that she heard a strange sound, as if a drop of something had fallen somewhere. Tao was about to get out of bed and check what was wrong, because it seemed to her that the sound was coming from behind the door. Namely, in apartment number 202, on the side where Yu Gui lives, who treated her to a bun. There lived a girl named Wujiu. She was very kind, generous, and had beautiful golden hair. The lady lived at the very top of the tower, and whenever her mother called her, she let her long hair down. Until one day, instead of his mother, a guy she didn't know climbed into the tower by the hair of his hair, and, according to him, turned out to be a prince. Yu Gui again found himself in the body of little Jin Ji, and the little girl opened her eyes in fear. The young man realized that his voice had just returned, and he was in the body of a girl lying in bed. Yu moved his hands and told himself that he was a child again, but he couldn't remember how it all ended. He tried to delve into his memories in order to remember how it all ended the last time. Yu Gui said that obviously someone was interfering with his memories, and he could not understand the matter. In his memories there was little Jin Ji, in whose eyes there was horror and fear from what she saw. Suddenly, someone's shadow began to approach the curtain behind which the little girl was. The shadow was rapidly approaching, about to pull back the curtain and enter Jin Ji's room. The prince was young and attractive, but the girl looked at him, and then involuntarily thought about it. Unexpectedly, Jin Ji opened her eyes wide and screamed as she was very scared. A blonde man in glasses and a medical gown asked what was wrong with her, and shouldn't she have fallen asleep by now. Yu Gui immediately remembered the suspicious blonde and tried to understand why it was him again. Jin Ji was very frightened by his appearance and did not know what to do because she thought that he wanted to harm her. But the man with glasses only raised his palm to the girl's head, not intending to harm her. He began to gently move his finger over Jin Ji's head, and at that moment the girl calmed down and began to close her eyes. The man said that she did not have a fever and asked if one story was not enough, to which Jin did not answer. She said that she was very thirsty, so she asked him to bring water, and the man touched her forehead again. He covered her with a blanket and said that he was going to get water, and asked her not to get out of bed again. Yu Gui tried to understand what was going on and wondered if this man was really going to harm Jin Ji. At one point the man turned around and was about to ask something from the girl, who was again scared. He asked Jin Ji how she liked the newly arrived teacher, to which she only began to sweat from excitement. After a while, the blonde brought the girl some hot water and said that she could drink it calmly. Jin saw her reflection in the crystalline water, and Yu Gui in her body tried to understand why he suddenly asked about the teacher. Most of Jin's memories are blurry, and Yu only knows that after the incident with Ardelic, teacher Leia came. In truth, Ardelic, in fact, was also a replacement for Carl's grandfather who suddenly disappeared. The blonde man with glasses asked little Jin Ji if the new teacher seemed better to her. The girl replied that Lady Leia was very affectionate and patient, and she promised to bring her fruit from her hometown. But still, Jin Ji asked why Ardelic didn't come, because classes with him were more productive. The man replied that he did not feel well, so he returned home, and would probably return as soon as he got better. Yu Gui knew that this was a lie, but tried to understand why he continued to do this when the secret had already been revealed. These thoughts did not leave the young man, because he was very curious to solve this mystery. He tried to understand what happened after the memories suddenly ended. Suddenly, someone called the man in a medical gown, and the phone began to vibrate in his pocket. He ordered to provide emergency assistance, stabilize the patient's condition and wait, since he himself would operate. He told Jin Ji that it would not be possible to put her to bed today, since there was a complex operation ahead, and she needed to return to the hospital. The girl just smiled sweetly at her father and said that it was okay, because she could sleep alone. Judged by memory, more than one generation of Jing Ji's family has been practicing medicine, and the very first began during Nightingale's lifetime. Her father is the head of the hospital and is also one of the best surgeons in the world, having earned 5 medals for his work. Yugue told himself that fortunately, her father had not yet shown his true colors, so it was too early to draw conclusions. At first it seemed to him that difficulties would arise only with playing the role of a girl, but now it looks like a novel. Jin Ji looked out the window out of boredom and suddenly saw something beautiful on the horizon. The girl began to look out the window with interest, and you realized that it looked like a traveling circus. But after that he wondered if the girl wanted to go see the circus, because she was bored. Ultimately, Jin Ji really wanted to see the traveling circus. She was very bored and wanted to have fun, and Yugue began to think about what he should do with her. The young man began to think, because before going to the circus, he needed to take her outside the estate. Yugue wanted to call this novel nothing more than Baby Jing Ji's Escape Plan, Part 2. The girl successfully ran up the stairs, and Yu told himself that this was already his personal record. Jin Ji ran towards the exit with enthusiasm and confidence, not thinking about the consequences, because she wanted to have fun. Yugue said that if the girl's memories are to be believed, at this time the butler and maids should already be resting. Then the main character only needs to figure out a way to pass the guards at the gate unnoticed. Jin Ji looked at the horizon with a sparkle in her eyes, as she realized that the path was clear for her. But everything didn't turn out the way she wanted, because the head maid in a black dress was standing in the courtyard. She is in the memories, but in them she never appeared on the second floor and had virtually no contact with Jin Ji. The girl looked at the head maid in surprise, and opened her eyes wide, because she understood that there was no way. Yugue could not understand how this was so, and wondered if he was seeing double. The head maid turned her attention to Lady Jin Ji and politely asked if they wanted anything. The girl continued to look at her and tried to put words together, but ultimately said that she didn't want anything. The maid told Jin Ji that it was time to rest since it was getting late. The little lady gently took the maid's hand, after which they were to go to the room. The maid girl didn't understand why the girl was pulling her hand, and looked at her with a little bewilderment. Jin Ji did not want to go to bed at all, and only threw out the word circus, making it clear that she wanted to watch it. Yugue didn't know why, but when he saw this woman's face, he suddenly had an idea. Jin Ji asked the head maid if she could take her to see a traveling circus. Yugue came to the conclusion that this woman would agree to absolutely any of his adventures. The circus security guard told the girls that today's performance was already over and they could come tomorrow morning. Yugue said in his thoughts that if he were in his place right now, absolutely anyone would be disappointed. Jin Ji desperately looked at the floor and let go of the red ball that the senior maid had bought for her. She said upsetly that apparently nothing could be done and suggested going back. The maid looked into the girl's upset eyes and realized that she could not allow her to be sad. Suddenly, she made a sharp movement, after which a rather loud sound was heard. The maid deftly used the deadly flying knife technique to cheer up Jin Ji. After which, the woman jumped through a fiery hoop, which was called the trapeze artist technique. Next, the circus performer's unicycle technique was performed, which made Jin Ji watch in amazement. Yugue, seeing all this, said that it seemed that he was beginning to understand, but the maid continued to perform tricks. The young man began to understand why this day was so special in Jin Ji's memories. After a while, the head maid took the cute girl by the hand, and they began to head towards the house. At certain moments, even Yugue's emotions, the emotions of an outside observer, resonate with her. And this came to a lot, but the young man's thoughts were interrupted because the girls had already returned to the house. At the gate of the Jing Ji family estate stood the girl's father, who held his hands in the pockets of his robe, silently waiting for them. The maid covered the girl's back, saying that she could handle it herself, because it was none of her business. Jinji's father grinned and snapped his fingers, using the blue beard technique. The girl, standing behind the head maid, was very frightened as strange things began to happen. The father came up to them and said that he already thought that Jinji had gone to the basement again. Yugue realized that he deliberately let him hear that urgent call from the hospital, which means he did not even leave the manor. The head maid was ready for extreme measures, and decided to take out the sharp blade that she was hiding under her dress. The father said that undoubtedly, he did not deny that after the last time she could already remember something. It was late and deep night outside, and the moon and stars together illuminated the earth. The head maid calmly looked into Jinji's father's eyes, and he said that his daughter could remember something. The girl asked her father what he meant, and what she shouldn't remember from his words. The head maid bowed her head and stood silently behind Jinji's father while he talked with his daughter. The father asked his daughter, who taught her to speak in such a tone, did she really decide to stop playing the role of a good girl? Jinji asked her father if he really no longer trusted her, and why should she pretend? She said that everything needs to be cleared up once and for all, but this concerns only the two of them, so others cannot be involved here. The man in the medical gown asked if she noticed how she dragged the maid into this. Yugue tried to understand whether all those people, including Ardalik, were suffering because they interacted with Jinji. The girl asked her father if he was really going to do to the maid the same as to the others, just because she was unlucky to meet her. Yugue could not understand why he needed this. Was it all because of the desire to remain the only one she had, or something else? Jinji turned her back to her father because she didn't want to talk to him at all. The man took out a sharp blade and said that it seemed that he understood everything that was happening around. The father told Jinji that it turns out that for her everything looks exactly like this, and it is not surprising, because this explains many oddities. He said that he seemed to have underestimated her centuries-old curse, to which the girl asked with interest what curse he was talking about. The man thought that to weaken the curse it would be enough to separate blood relatives, but their family turned out to be extremely strong. He said that they would consider this as a defeat of the hypothesis, and Yugue tried to understand whether she was really so afraid that he would do something to her. At the same moment, the owner of the body suddenly found herself in front of a man, namely her father. Jinji could not let her father do anything to the maid, and she had an overwhelming desire to kill. The girl's insidious father was going to use one of his techniques to deal with the maid. He snapped his fingers and said that he was using Rapunzel's technique, which was considered one of the strongest. Jinji's eyes widened in fear at that moment as she knew what was coming next. The girl ran up to her father to pounce and stop his insidious deeds, but she was not so strong. Yugue was thrown aside, losing control of the girl's body, which left him very stunned. The young man realized that this was a technique of suggestion, because of which he lost control over his body. The father told Jinji that he had neglected his duty as a father for too long, so he would have to take tough measures. He took a piece of his daughter's hair and said that he was very sorry, preparing to cut off the hair, but the girl stood in a stupor. At that very moment, a piece of shiny and charming white hair was cut off by his father's sharp blade. Charming hair fell down one after another, as if falling into an abyss. The father told Jinji that he was very sorry, but her happy childhood in ignorance was over, and Yugue seemed to have fallen into the water. It was late at night outside, and Tao Hualing was also having a hard time, and she did not sleep. She looked at Yugue's door through the slightly open door, trying to understand what was going on here. Tao Hualing admitted to herself that she was unconsciously starting to worry about this person. Suddenly, the door to apartment number 202 opened slightly, emitting an unpleasant creak. Blue-eyed Tao Hualing looked at what was happening with a little fear, not knowing what to expect. Yugue came out of the apartment and began to head somewhere in a hurry, which alarmed the girl, because it was already late. She didn't understand why he was leaving again, since it was already such a late time for walks. After a while, Yugue got on the subway and was about to go to the hospital. He is like a whale that constantly needs to rise to the surface to take a breath of air. The ability to dive deeply overloads the brain and it cannot maintain it for long, and after exiting it cools down. The dispatcher announced that the train was heading to the hospital station, and emphasized that the exit to the platform was on the left side. Yugue told himself that no matter how urgent it was, he would have to wait at least a day to find out what happened next. The main character entered the elevator and chose to go up to the 5th floor of the hospital building. Yugoi wondered what kind of curse that man was talking about, and what kind of relationship the father and daughter had with that maid. The young man understood that perhaps now he could learn something from Jinji herself. The nurse told Yugoi that he was so late this time, and the young man asked Sister Zhang if there was Sister Jean. The nurse replied that she had asked for time off this evening, and Manager Jiang had assigned her to do the work for her. These words upset Yugoi a little, and he thought even more when he remembered Manager Jiang. He remembered that in the morning the manager, when talking with Jinji, seemed to hint at his connection with the sale of corpses from the hospital. Standing in front of Zhang's office, Yugoi told himself that since he had come, he should at least see him. To begin with, the main character decided to knock on the office, after which the manager asked to enter. With a smile, Yugoi asked Manager Jiang if he was busy and said that they had seen each other this morning. The manager asked if he remembered correctly that Yu was a relative of Xiao Meng, and the young man confirmed this. Jiang said with a smile that since he came to him so late, he must have something to do with him. But Yugoi looked at him in bewilderment, because he did not understand what he was talking about, and asked what the manager meant. Jiang said that he knows, it is difficult for him to speak, because this is human nature, and he can be understood. He also said there is no shame in signing a waiver for a patient with soul loss syndrome. Yugoi asked him if he had heard correctly, and Jiang said about refusing treatment, while remembering Xiao Meng. The manager began to read the list, which said about 29-year-old Zhang Xiaotong with the same diagnosis. He was hospitalized for about 1,500 days, and the total treatment costs amounted to more than 1.5 million yuan. Then he began to read about the 27-year-old woman Zhangli, and his face was absolutely calm. But all this got on the nerves of the main character, and he interrupted Manager Jiang with a shout. Yugoi looked sternly into the eyes of the manager sitting opposite him and asked what he wanted to say by this. Jiang said that often people only focus on the initial misfortune, without noticing the secondary consequences. He asked what would hit the state funds more, the loss of one workforce versus the same number of disabled people. For the past 5 years, the increase in the number of patients who have lost their ability to work has been dragging society down. Jiang said it was like residual radiation and waste from a weapon of mass destruction. After these words, Yugoi's gaze became even more stern, and he angrily turned to Manager Jiang. Hitting the table, he shouted and asked if he was sure that the words he spoke could come from the doctor's lips. Jiang replied that on a national scale this is only one of the factors that drags the economy to the bottom. He also said that at the human level, these are only patients who are struggling for life and balancing between life and death. The manager asked Yugoi in a calm tone if he himself was not in the same situation. The guy said that his life would lose meaning without Xiao Meng, and Jiang asked why he came to him at such a time. At one point, Yugoi seemed to have an epiphany and began to think about the soul loss syndrome. He knows the patient he just met in the elevator, and he has the same diagnosis. Yugoi remembered that the nurse in the elevator pressed minus the first floor, and there is a morgue on it. The hero recalled Jinji's request under no circumstances to sign a consent to transfer the body for autopsy. He also remembered that lawyer Meng had talked about the illegal trade of corpses in the hospital, and the young man wondered if this was really true. Yugoi asked if Jiang was persuading patients' relatives to refuse treatment in order to reduce the workload of the staff. The manager replied that he also wanted the relatives to be able to invest their funds in something more promising in the future. Yugoi said that he really cared about them that much, and after his explanation, everything became clear to him. He said that tomorrow they would stop therapy, wait for her vital signs to fade, and then simply transport her to the funeral home. After which, Yugoi whispered in the manager's ear that they would ultimately cremate Xiao Meng. The manager said that he would advise considering the option of donating the corpse to the hospital. Jiang looked into Yugoi's eyes and realized that he was behaving unusually, which means he could be deceiving him. He called the hospital security service, where he was asked where the staff needed to go, but the main character did not let him do this, and calmly used Dr. Doolittle's technique. Manager Jiang opened his eyes wide in surprise and froze for a few seconds, looking at Yugoi. After a few seconds, the surprise disappeared from his eyes, and he simply lowered his tired gaze. Manager Jiang told the security dispatcher not to come up and hung up. Yugoi was a little jubilant in his heart and told himself that his plan had worked successfully. The main character began to think about the state of the so-called deep immersion, and its consequences. He said that this condition is similar to a remote invasion of the personality of another person. Reality, including the environment and other people, all this also falls into the field of his own perception. That is, he didn't just penetrate Jin Ji's body, everyone else also merged with him, all the knowledge they possess and the like. This list, of course, also includes third-level superpowers, namely, psychological suggestion. As for suggestion, it seems as if it is an improved version, superior in strength and duration of action. Jiang told Yugui that the payment stopped coming a long time ago, and if they continue to help the patient, the hospital itself will go bankrupt. The manager said that he was doing everything to avoid this, and one way or another, hospitals are for-profit organizations. Yugui asked if this was why he was getting the patient's relatives on his side and hoping that they would refuse treatment. But Manager Jiang replied in a calm tone that this was just cost-cutting. He said that patients with this syndrome have all other functions of life normal, and this makes their bodies extraordinarily valuable. Manager Jiang pulled the doorknob to go into another room, and Yugui continued to follow him. The manager said that research on living organisms sounds very pretentious, and in general it is a questionable act. Yugui looked around seriously and said in his thoughts that all these people were still alive, and they all had soul loss syndrome. He said that there was a very high probability that it was Mazu, under the leadership of Wutiao, who were selling corpses on the black market. Yugui asked Chief Jiang if these patients were all men, to which he replied that yes, because girls are unreliable. Jiang said that over the years, it has happened that women's corpses have disappeared from the morgue, and it has hardly been possible to transport even one of them. He said that if it weren't for the situation with Yugui's sister, they would have taken action long ago and lied to their relatives about the death. The main character became furious and attacked the manager, grabbing him by the collar and pressing him to the wall. He angrily shouted that he should not even dare to do anything to Xiao Meng and threatened to kill him for this. The manager only answered in a calm tone that he would not do this, and Yugui clenched his teeth in anger. He let go of Manager Jiang's tie and said that he wanted to accompany today's convoy. The manager said that there was no problem and said that he planned to personally escort them, so he could go with him. Yugui looked at Jiang's back and said in his thoughts that even under hypnosis he was perfectly aware of his actions. Clearly aware of his own inhumanity, the manager is firmly confident in the rationality of his actions. Watching everything that was happening and listening to the dialogues, Yugui drew some conclusions for himself. With a slight grin, he said that the further this all goes, the nastier it becomes. All those accompanying the convoy climbed into the ambulance, and after a while they left the place. There were several guards in the car who were armed with assault rifles. Yugui said in his thoughts that the level of security was significantly higher than that required for an ordinary hospital. Jiang said that female corpses disappear, but male corpses do not, and if this is so, then why is he so nervous now? The ambulance driver slowed down because there was a need to report something on the radio. With his nerves draining, he radioed that they had left the safe zone. Everyone was told to be on guard, and beads of sweat ran down the faces of Yugui and Manager Jiang. Armed guards were ready for any outcome, and there was a tense atmosphere in the car. The ambulance was driving through the tunnel at rapid speed. The driver of the car was extremely tense. Being extremely tense, the driver was sweating and telling himself that he could appear at any moment. Suddenly, an incomprehensible black and red creature appeared on the horizon, heading behind the car. The driver of the car looked in the mirror and saw a creature looking at him angrily, and became even more nervous. The people inside the car began to get very nervous, and the guards were ready to shoot. The situation was extremely tense, and loud knocks began to come from the back door of the car. Strong blows hit the iron door, and with every second more and more dents appeared on it. Within a minute, the dents increased in size, and the blows did not stop for a second. Finally, the iron door of the ambulance was broken through by the sharp claws of the demon. The demon dealt a crushing blow to the iron door, after which it flew out to the side. Yugui silently looked at everything that was happening with extremely surprised eyes, and did not know how to react to it. A demon in a black robe and with red eyes appeared before people, terrifying with its gloomy appearance. The two guards couldn't believe that a demon was standing in front of them and tried to come up with a plan of action. The armed guards huddled together and prepared to start shooting at the enemy, while being very nervous. At that same moment, fire was opened on the demon from all available weapons, but he managed to evade. Their actions angered the demon, and with a sharp movement he grabbed the face of one of the guards with his sharp claws. The convoy security officer, who was a colleague of this man, was dumbfounded, because all this was happening in front of his face. The demon's eyes became even redder, and he sternly peered into the eyes of the guard, who became his victim. The guard's eyes bulged out of fear and stood silently in place, not knowing what to do in this situation. Manager Jiang looked at this with his mouth open and said to himself that in terms of physical training, a demon could not compare with a human. The guards desperately tried to fight back the bloodthirsty demon, rushing at him with all their might, but their attempts were in vain. Yugue decided that he needed to save himself with all his might, and grabbed the manager by the hair and ran with him to the side. Looking at the back of the bloodthirsty demon, Yu told himself that this was not at all what he expected to see. The demon immediately turned around and looked at the main character, who was looking exactly at him. He spread his arms to the side with a sharp movement, intending to pounce on the young man. With sharp claws, he scratched Yugue, after which the main character began to bleed down his face and hand. The young man was stunned, because the attack was fierce, but he tried with all his might to repel the enemy. If it weren't for imitating the abilities of the head made from Jin Ji's memories, he would have no chance of defeating him. The ambulance driver lost control of the vehicle and screamed in fear. Bright sparks flew out from under the wheels of the ambulance, and the driver managed to control the car. Yugue was very nervous as he had little strength left to resist the enemy. The demon looked sternly into his terrified eyes and was about to deal a fatal blow. He clenched his strong fist and swung it to finish off the main character and quickly escape. Yugue was unable to withstand an opponent whose strength was many times greater than his, and took a blow to the body. From the blow he was unable to stand on his feet, as a result of which he began to rapidly fall to the floor. The demon in the robe picked up the corpse of the man from the hospital in his arms and began to walk away. Yugue recovered and asked Manager Jiang to honestly answer the question he would ask him. He asked, it turns out that in fact he secretly turned everything around so that one woman would get lost among the corpses. Jiang admitted that this was so, and at first he thought that he could deceive the dead-stealing demon in this way. Yugue was asked if the previously disappeared women were abducted by the demon, to which the demon replied that this was exactly the case. He said that because of him, their hospital could not transport the corpses of women for a long time, and now they are 25 times more expensive than men. Yugue asked him not to continue and began to wonder if the demon kidnapper was only interested in women. Meanwhile, the weather over the area where Tao Hualing lived became sunny, and the sky was clear and blue. Wang Nanchao scratched the back of his head with a smile and asked the girl if she thought that he was completely stupid, because he had only just brought her things. He said that he hadn't lived with anyone for a long time, and single people have a freer life, so if it weren't for his colleagues, he wouldn't have remembered. Tao Hualing said that everything was fine and thanked him, and Nanchao said that every night she would sleep better. Van said that he needed to go to the incident, and if anything happened, she could call him, but the girl delayed him in fear. She nervously said that she would return all the money for rent, food, and clothing within a month. Wang Nanchao asked her to just remember to tell him later how to find her, and he would arrest those who gave her the job. He stroked her and asked her to enjoy every day while she was still underage, and his touches did not even irritate Tao. Yugue, meanwhile, was right at the window where they were talking, and covered his mouth with a yawn. Blue-eyed Tao Hualing looked at him and said to herself that this is the guy who lives next door. Yugue waved and greeted his neighbors, smiling slightly at them, and went home. Tao Hualing mutually greeted the young man and silently watched him enter the apartment. She wondered if he had really just returned, and where he had been all this time, because he looked tortured. Wang Nanchao said that he received a report from eyewitnesses about a suspicious person last night. He thoughtfully asked if the day before yesterday the man who had just come home was at home, but at one point he began to smile and said that he was talking nonsense, because Tao had only moved in yesterday, so she couldn't know this. Tao Hualing thought deeply and remembered her meeting with Yugue the night before yesterday, when he had a pink child's mask on his face. It was already evening outside, the sun had set below the horizon, and the moon began to illuminate the earth with its bright light. Yugue said that there has been progress in Meng Jishu's case, but in comparison, the situation with Jin Ji requires active action. Something told him that the connection between these two cases could be much more serious than it seems at first glance. Yugue never rested, and admitted to himself that he could hardly stand on his feet, but that didn't matter now. He decided it was time to take advantage of the deep dive and closed his eyes tightly. After some time, the deep dive worked, and the main character ended up in Jin Ji's childhood. He opened his eyes in the body of a sweet girl, trying to realize that he had managed to inhabit her. Yugue began to move his body and wondered how much time had passed since the dive. Little Jin Ji's body was the same as his, she was powerless and her condition was unhealthy. In the body of a girl, the main character began to walk around the room, while conducting a monologue in his thoughts. Jin Ji's behavior seemed very strange to Yugue, and he did not understand what was happening to her. The little girl's eyes turned red, and the main character wondered what happened to her during his absence. Initially, the goal was to save her sister in order to immerse herself in Jin Ji's life and master her healing ability. However, on the very first dive, the course of history secretly changed its direction, and many factors influenced this. For the second time, the main character, Yugue, saw with his own eyes the collapse of her measured life in lies. The image of how his father cut off the hair of Jin Ji, who was little at that time, was firmly stuck in his head, and she could not resist it. And finally, his third deep dive into the body of the little nurse Jin Ji came. This place looks like some kind of special insulator, all these Gesell mirrors, there must be someone out there watching his every move. Here he is on the Jin Ji time axis, and now, when talking about the interval, we are talking about years, not weeks, like in previous times. The unknown man in white snapped his fingers while in the same room as Jin Ji. Yugue wondered if the girl had been locked here since he left last time. Jin Ji crossed her arms over her chest, and the main character decided to use healing. But the attempt was again futile and ineffective, from which Yugue concluded that she received this ability even later. He decided that since he would meet her again in the future, this was clearly not the end of her life, and he just needed to get out of here. Jin Ji shouted loudly that she wanted to talk about something and asked who was in charge here. She didn't know if anyone was watching her, since she was behind Gesell's mirror. Suddenly, the mirror began to glow with blue stripes, and Jin Ji was asked who she was. Yugue realized that this was a prescribed questioning procedure and wondered if they really wanted to test her clarity of consciousness. Jin Ji introduced herself in a calm tone, understanding the principle of the procedure for confirming identity. The system asked a second question about how many days the girl has been conscious. Jin Ji answered with a little excitement that she remembered everything from the moment she came here. She was waiting for the third question, and the system finally began to formulate it, which was very slow. The girl was asked whether she would eventually admit guilt for her own actions. Jin Ji asked, puzzled, what she was guilty of, and what her action was wrong. With a slight tremor in her voice, she asked if they were not to blame for locking her in this room. Gesell's mirror lit up red, indicating anger at the girl. Yugue became nervous, as did little Jin Ji, about to come up with a rescue plan. Tears began to flow from the girl's eyes, and her cheeks turned red from fear, which alarmed the main character even more. Unbearable chaos began to happen in the room, and Jin Ji began to be carried away. A red light enveloped the room, and the radiation blinded the girl's eyes and prevented her from moving. Tao Hualing, meanwhile, was quietly doing household chores, not suspecting anything. On the calendar, she used a red felt-tip pen to mark the days that meant something to her. On the hanger hung her washed casual clothes, namely a striped sweater and a white skirt. Tao Hualing touched the hanging clothes, which were almost dry in the sun, which made the girl happy. Having smelled the washed clothes, the girl began to smile, because the smell of the washing powder was very pleasant. A few minutes later she got dressed, and while adjusting the collar of her sweater, she became a little wary, because she heard knocks on the door. Tao Hualing opened the door slightly and saw Yugue knocking on the door of a woman wearing a cap. The knocking woman asked if Yugue was at home, and Tao said in her thoughts that she had a good figure and temperament. She wondered if this young man was really that popular among women. Tao Hualing pulled the doorknob to close the door and continue to do her personal business. But suddenly, the door was opened by a girl who was knocking on Yugu's door, which greatly surprised Tao. The woman in the cap asked the girl, frightened by surprise, if anyone was here. Blue-eyed Tao Hualing asked with a little fear what she wanted, and the woman only said that it turned out that it was a girl. With a smile, she asked if they would really talk through the crack of the door. Tao asked for forgiveness, and in her thoughts said that the woman had a powerful aura, and she almost involuntarily fulfilled her request. The girl said that she just wanted to ask if the girl knew the guy who lived across the street. Frightened Tao Hualing awkwardly and not entirely confidently replied that she was familiar, but not close. The blonde touched her hair with a smile and asked if she could give him something from her when they met. She smiled sweetly at Tao Hualing and asked her to tell Yugui that Jin Ji was looking for him. After a while, when she left, Tao said to herself that she had not actually seen Yugui since he returned the day before yesterday morning. She got a little worried and wondered if he shouldn't have at least been hungry, since he never left the room. Even though she just said that she knew him, he just helped her one day, and who is she to worry about him? Although Tao Hualing thought so, she still asked Mrs. Anderson for a spare key. Some very strange feeling pushes her to move on, and the girl inserted the key into the door lock. At that very moment, she opened the door to Yugui's room and noticed that the room was completely empty. She walked further around the room and asked if the young man was at home, but there was no answer. On the wall she saw a board with many different notes and photographs of the main character. Tao Hualing saw the photo and said to herself that the woman looked like the one who came just now. The blue-eyed girl looked around a little and noticed something strange that made her wonder. Tao Hualing's blue bottomless eyes reflected fear after what she saw. Yugui was sitting on the floor in front of her, unconscious, and she immediately asked with a cry if he was okay. Tao Hualing immediately approached the main character and began to try to bring him to consciousness with touches. She put her hand on his shoulder and tried to rouse him, but it didn't work at all. But suddenly, something incomprehensible to Tao Hualing began to happen, and her eyes opened wide in fear. It was as if she began to fall into an abyss, and not at all understanding what was happening to her, the girl fell silently. She had a few seconds left before she fell and was completely immersed in the water, and she continued to fall in bewilderment. Just a few seconds later, Tao Hualing fell into the water and quickly sank to the bottom. Yugui wondered if he had treated her badly, but the stupid girl followed him again. Tao Hualing began to suffocate under the water, not having the strength to resist, and the man said that he did not need her. He is the only one she has left, at least in this world, and the voice did not subside for a long time. A huge school of fish flashed in front of Tao Hualing, rapidly swimming in an unknown direction. The fish seemed to form a kind of sphere that protected the curious girl from death. Tao Hualing could not understand what was happening, because she only remembered how she touched Yugui, and then the movements were difficult. She had already felt something similar once, and now everything around her seemed to be real. Not far from her, in front of her, she saw a sphere that was shrouded in red light and sparkled brightly. Lying in the sphere was Yugui, who was unconscious and did not show any signs of life at that moment. Tao Hualing began to head towards him, as he looked very unwell. She tried with all her might to swim to Yugui, although it was difficult, but the girl did not give up. Yugui went to the bottom, like all the other drowned people in the illusion of deep immersion. Tao Hualing had no intention of giving up, and finally her persistence paid off. She realized that the further she swam, the harder it was to overcome the resistance, but she still almost reached Yugui. When Tao was ready to grab the main character, he nevertheless escaped and quickly sank to the bottom. Hualing did not give up trying and tried to prevent his fall, but she succeeded with great difficulty. Yugui continued to sink, while unconscious, and the girl only looked at it in surprise. She tried to use one of her abilities to contact him. Attempts to use the ability were futile and ineffective the first few times. Still, Tao Hualing managed to use the ability and stood behind Yugui, who was looking at the crying Jin Ji. She turned to the main character, who stood with his back turned to her. Tao asked Yugui if he was okay, and the bristly protagonist just turned around silently. The first few times his gaze was absolutely cold-blooded and emotionless towards the girl, but after a few more seconds, his gaze became extremely stern, and at the same time tired. Yugui didn't know how much time had passed, but during this period, Jin Ji's hair managed to grow 3 times and be cut. Jin stood silently in one place, and her upset gaze was lowered to the floor, just like the gaze of the main character in her body. Yugoi began to remember his futile attempts to escape, and one of these was the doctor's examination. On the doctor's iron tray were medical instruments, one of which was sharp scissors. For the first time, Yugoi was still trying to take possession of something piercing and cutting and escape, but his opponent was too prudent and tied Jinji up so that she could not resist. Yugoi tried everything he could think of, but it was of no use. He never managed to escape from here, he also can't get out of this nightmare himself, and the two of them are imprisoned. When imprisoned under the influence of potent drugs, thoughts gradually slow down and consciousness begins to dissipate. The only thing that kept Yugoi from drowning completely was his goal. This continued until he heard a little girl scream from behind him. The main character looked at the girl and immediately realized that it was Tao Hualing who found him. He couldn't figure out why it was her and whether she also had the ability to deep dive and was using it on him. The unshaven Yugoi was about to say something to Tao Hualing who found him, but the girl interrupted him. She asked him to shut up and said that she had more questions, so she would be the first to start asking them. Tao asked Yugoi who he was, where they were and what kind of place there was before, similar to the sea. She also asked who this girl is and how he is related to her, why he is now flying above her and looks like he has aged. Yugoi looked in surprise at Tao Hualing, who was asking him questions with such curiosity. With a sincere smile, he replied that at first he was not in particular order, but fortunately, an element of surprise was brought in here. You asked Tao Hualing to give him some time to think, and said that he would explain everything in order. After a while, she learned that he used deep immersion, and this was not just a dream, but Jinji's past. Yugoi said that she could remember this to begin with, but his actions would still be influenced to some extent by Jinji's consciousness. This particular body has been under the influence of drugs for several years now, and he, too, is beginning to break away from reality. Tao Hualing asked what was happening to her then, because she was an ordinary person and had never heard of deep diving before. Yugoi replied that her description suggested that she came into contact with him while he was in a state of deep immersion. He said that all these unusual abilities are spiritual power and if it has potential, then it could resonate with him. Tao Hualing decided to join Yugoi and lay down next to him to resonate. Yugoi in Jinji's body stood against the wall, behind which were scientists in white coats. Tao Hualing said that she could walk through walls, and others would not be able to see or catch her. The tiny girl told Yugoi that she would come up with a plan of action and would definitely get him out of here. The main character told himself that no matter how much he convinced himself, he could not deny that it was a selfish and irresponsible act. Only he had to pay for what was happening and suffer from remorse. There was no point in involving others in this. But Yugoi is forced to admit that by this point the situation was out of control, and he could no longer cope alone. He told himself that now he could only save himself, and the salvation of Jinji was not in his hands, but in the hands of Tao Hualing. Yugoi told her that they had only met a few times and did not know each other at all, and asked why she should help him. He asked how she could be sure that he told her the truth and was not up to anything bad, which made Tao Hualing wonder. The blue-eyed girl's cheeks turned red and she replied with a smile that it was intuition. She said that she had never been particularly smart, but her intuition had never let her down in her life. Tao said that she didn't want to get involved in something she didn't understand at all, but in the whole world only she felt it. Yugoi stroked her and said that in that case, he would like her to find one person outside and give her a message. Tiny Tao Hualing and the main character in the body of young Jinji looked at each other, carefully discussing all the details. Yugoi said that if she heard, there might be a chance to escape, and Tao said that she would not remember the message that was too long. But the main character said that the message would not be long at all, and she would definitely remember it. The young man clarified that there will only be one word, but it plays a very important role. A maid in a black dress stood in her house, looking at the photograph of little Jinji with pain in her soul. She lived in a huge palace, which was decorated with trees, and the rays of the sun brightly illuminated it. Butterflies flew in the green, charming garden, and birds sang on the estate. Tiny Tao Hualing arrived at the indicated place at the request of Yugoi to convey a message. The blue-eyed girl said in her thoughts that she had finally managed to get out, and now she was in the right place. She really liked the place, and the warm sun, the bright aroma of flowers and small animals complemented it. Tao told herself that for her this was a dream that would never come true, and moments from her childhood flashed through her mind. But Hualing caught herself at this point and said that now was not the time for such thoughts. She pushed off from the ground with her tiny and delicate legs, and then began to fly forward. Tao Hualing once again reminded herself that first she must fulfill Yu Gui's instructions. She asked him why he was sure that that woman would help Jin Ji, and Yu replied that no one would help except her. After some time, Tao Hualing had already reached the window where the maid was supposed to be. She remembered that Yu Gui had said that this woman was not a backup plan in this story, but their last ray of hope. Tao Hualing leaned against the window and began to watch the maid who was wiping dust from the table. In her thoughts she called the girl very beautiful, but the thought of how to convey the message haunted her. The sweet maid looked a little sad, and Tao Hualing wondered if Yu Gui had asked her to find her. The charming maid decided to open the window in order to ventilate the room in excellent weather. She opened the window wide and looked into the distance for several seconds, as if thinking about something. The tiny and inconspicuous fairy Tao Hualing flew up to her and tried to speak to her, but the woman did not hear her. The baby tried with all her might to appeal to the maid, but she did not hear her at all, and continued to clean. Tao Hualing flew right up to the maid's face, but she still didn't even look at her. The tiny girl began to get nervous and told herself that it looked like the plan was doomed to fail from the very beginning. Tao waved her arms and legs and realized that she was leaving. Except for Yu Gui, no one could see her at all. The maid continued to clean, and at one moment the hand was at the same level where Tao Hualing was standing. She waved her hand, but the girl went through her hand, which made her fall into a stupor. Tao Hualing fell to her knees and began to cry, and a blue bird the same size as her landed next to her. The maid immediately drew attention to the beautiful and lush blue bird sitting on the windowsill. The bird waved its head cutely at Tao Hualing, as if trying to convey something, which caught the girl's attention. The blue bird chirped to the girl and she wondered in surprise whether the bird could see her. Tao told herself that while she was walking through the garden, it seemed to her that some butterflies and squirrels were afraid of her. Hualing began to emit blue radiation, and the bird continued to sit near her and watch carefully. The pupils of the girl's bottomless blue eyes widened, and she herself looked at the sky. The bird continued to remain in one place and was absolutely motionless the entire time. Tao Hualing said in her thoughts that this is all so strange, but she seems to feel something. The maid was surprised by the behavior of the bird, and Tao thought that the chick was asking her what kind of bird she was. The girl realized that she seemed to be able to understand animals and communicate with them. With a sweet smile, Tao Hualing said in a low voice, as expected from her fifth kitten. In her thoughts she said that animals understood her much better than people, and this strange thought had been with her since childhood. Tao recalled that before the big collapse, 4 cats lived in their house at the same time. One of the kittens was named Sugar, who had gray eyes and a brown and white coat. The second cat's name was Soul. She was blue-eyed and plump, and her color was white and dark brown. The third was a gray-white cat with greenish eyes and pointed ears, named Pepper. The last of the kittens was a red-striped kitten named Soy Sauce, and he was smaller than all the others. Little Tao Hualing watched her beloved cats with admiration and was always close to them. She slept cuddling with cats and thought that she could feel the emotions of all animals. Tao Hualing also believed that to some extent she even had the ability to come into contact with them. To such an extent that in some the situation is capable, like them, of sensing danger. Her memories were of her smart cats jumping off the couch one after another, as if sensing something. Remembering the face of the last one, Tao Hualing said in her thoughts that every person is capable of something. The little blue-eyed girl pulled her mother by her white dress, thereby distracting her from cleaning. She pulled her mother outside, where the street lights were already shining brightly, to show something. Tao, instead of using complex principles, relied on what she could do, so her actions depended heavily on intuition. Hualing recalled how one night, even before she understood what a big collapse was, she felt a different atmosphere in the house. She recalled the faces of her beloved cats, who seemed to be watching everything that was happening in the house with great understanding. Her parents said some words, but she did not understand their meaning, but she could feel her father's anger, her mother's regret and panic. It seemed to Tao Hualing that they were faced with a problem that they could not solve on their own, and gradually the father became distant, and the mother, constantly working to the limit to feed her family, became increasingly tired and exhausted. Soy Sauce was the first to leave, He had been in poor health since childhood, and she knew that the disease was not fatal, but there was no money for medicine. About a week after that, his serious older brother Pepper disappeared, but he was good, could catch mice and was not afraid of dogs. Later that day, the mother added food to salt and sugar's bowls, which should have lasted them for 2 days. Tao recalled how her mother said that she would go grocery shopping and then cook her scrambled eggs with onions, and asked her to sit at home. Hualing recalled that her mother opened the door and went out, as she usually did. She was good at hiding it, but she said that cats tolerate pain well, they are not afraid of it, and tears flowed down the girl's cheeks. Tao Hualing also knew that cats would not allow those they care about the most to grieve. When they foresee their death, they simply quietly go to a place where no one will find them and die alone. She said in her thoughts that people can behave the same way, and although she has never been particularly smart, she always trusts her intuition. After all the memories, Tao Hualing burst into tears because her heart was very heavy. But looking back, the mental pain subsided, because something happened that made her pleasantly surprised. Many small animals came running to Tao Hualing, who treated her well and were not afraid. The maid looked with surprise at the windowsill, where so many small animals had gathered. The squirrel was friendly towards the little bird whose chest was blue. The caterpillar and butterfly seemed to want to hug, but had no opportunity to do so. The blue bird, which flew to Tao Hualing very first, stood firmly on its paws, as if about to do something. She began to hum something and the girl asked if she was really calling her and asking her not to be sad. Suddenly, something strange happened, and Tao Hualing's arms weakened for a few seconds. At that same moment, the girl rose slightly into the air, as if inhabiting the blue bird next to her. A slightly transparent blue color appeared on Tao Hualing's body, signaling that she was controlling the bird. The girl didn't understand what was going on, but her every movement was reflected on the blue bird. Tao Hualing opened her mouth wide in surprise as she realized that she seemed to be in the body of a small bird. The maid stood emotionlessly at the windowsill and drew attention to the falling blue feather. She wanted to catch the feather of a bluebird, which she successfully did and began to examine it. The blue bird flew beautifully in the sky, which greatly interested the emotionless maid. Tao Hualing said in her thoughts that it was very difficult to control the bird, and tried to figure out how to keep her balance. She wondered if Yugui was now as connected to Jinji's body as she was to the bird's body. The bird landed on the windowsill where the maid was standing, and Tao decided that she needed to try to fulfill Yugui's request. The girl tried to say the word mom, but the birds couldn't convey it and just chirped. Tao Hualing was in a slight stupor and did not know what to do next, because the bird cannot speak. The girl looked at the maid and said in her thoughts that the woman did not understand her at all. She could not speak in her own voice, and she said that she had to move into the body of some parrot. The maid closed the window, but Tao Hualing, in the body of a small bird, managed to fly into the room. The bird began to circle around the room, and the woman said that she had just tidied everything up there. Tao told herself that while the maid's attention was on her, she had to figure out a way to convey a message to Yugui. She looked at the bookshelf and seemed to have an epiphany, after which she successfully came up with a plan of action. The blue bird landed on one of the books on the shelf, and Tao Hualing decided that she could stop at this book. She really hoped that the maid would take her hint and she would convey the message to the protagonist. Tao Hualing, in the body of a blue bird, began to tap the book with her beak to attract the maid's attention. The woman wondered, puzzled, what the bird was trying to say with its actions. The blue bird continued to confidently and forcefully tap its beak on the book so that the girl would finally open it. Her persistent actions bore fruit and finally, the woman heard the word mom. Everything in her soul collapsed at that moment, and tears began to flow from her eyes, because the girl was in great pain. The ground seemed to disappear from under the maid's feet, and clutching her head, she took a few steps back. Tao Hualing was very worried and wondered if the woman was okay. The maid burst into bitter tears and tried to say something, but she couldn't. Finally, she was able to pull herself together and said that all this was true and she had to be strong. She confidently stated that she could not allow this to happen because she was a mother. The maid dropped the mop and began to walk forward, saying that she would never give up her child. Tao Hualing looked after her with admiration and said that it seemed that her plan had worked. She freed the blue bird and wondered if this was the magic Yugui was talking about. After a while, Tao Hualing asked the hero if he really wanted to do everything this way. Yugue said that if this is the only way to remove the stone from Jin Ji's heart, then they should take this step. Jin angrily said that she wanted to talk to her father and was waiting for a response from the surveillance system. The system immediately asked the girl a question and asked her to answer who she was. Jin Ji confidently replied that it didn't matter who she was, but they could be sure of something. In a strange tone, the girl said that she was confident that she was not Jin Ji. Yugue in the girl's body said that he remembered everything from their previous dialogue, as well as the third question. He said he could plead guilty, but he wanted to talk to his father first. In response, the main character heard only silence, but continued to listen carefully. Expiring then, Yugue told Tao Hualing that the bets were made and all that was left was to wait. Jin Ji sat on the floor and bent her knees, expecting vile and insidious actions in her direction. Suddenly, the door to the closed room opened, and people in yellow biohazard suits entered. They sprayed a strange pink substance into the room, and Jin Ji began to lose consciousness. Within a few minutes she was put in a straitjacket, and she herself was additionally restrained with belts. An injection was given in the neck, and one of the men said that it was better to increase the dose and asked that measures be taken so that she could not move. People in yellow biohazard suits began to leave the room, but one of them stopped. The man looked at Jin Ji with a little pity and stared at her for a few seconds. The unconscious girl was chained to the table while sitting and remained unconscious for some time. After some time, Jin Ji woke up, and the blonde who deprived her of her happy life said that she had finally woken up. For the first few seconds, the girl silently looked into the man's eyes, trying to fully come to her senses. The man greeted Jin Ji and said that he regretted that their meeting was taking place under such circumstances. The girl began to look around with a little excitement and was shocked by what was happening around her. The father admitted in a calm tone that indeed, it was quite rude to treat his own daughter like that. He added that he had been waiting for her to appear again since that night 4 years ago when they had a chance to talk at the gate. Yugue in the girl's body listened to the conversation and said to himself that now it is clear what these 3 questions were about. Jin Ji's father, wearing a white medical coat, began to tell the young man that everything could have been different if he had come earlier. He said that if that were the case, his poor daughter wouldn't have to suffer for so long. Yugue replied that even without his intervention there was cruel treatment of his daughter, so this is just a reason to turn the tables. The father agreed, but said that his appearance opened up new horizons for his research, which he could not even think of before. Getting up from his chair, he said that due to his own prejudices, for a long time he could not guess about Yugue's presence. The father added that having now analyzed all the guy's actions and words since that first time in the basement, he finally understood something. He realized that Yugue was never the third person Jin Ji created to protect herself from bad memories. The man called the main character an independent fourth look that does not belong to this world. Jin Ji's father also added that as a conscious object, he has his first glance. He said that the perception of others besides himself is a second glance, and the existence of objects and phenomena, observed from an objective point of view, is the third view. The man said that regardless of these 3 views, which is theoretically impossible, with a slight tremor in his voice, he said that, after all, there is a 4th view. Yugue looked at the man with particular surprise and wariness, although he did not see him. In his thoughts he said that even among these people there were, like him, ready to expect his appearance again after the second meeting. The father called the guy a 4th glance and said that he probably has a rule that he must follow. Yugue immediately went deep into his thoughts and began to remember many moments from his life. If he used deep dive frequently, his actions would cause some people to become aware of his presence. He remembered a cute pink-haired girl and a guy with gray hair, one of whose eyes was red and the other yellow. Yugue silently thought for a while that his actions were often extravagant. Jin Ji's father said that he did not know what his little daughter had done to deserve his favor, but since his intentions did not mean anything bad, he offered to help each other with the healing of his daughter. The words of the girl's father shocked the young man, and he reacted very violently to them. With Jin Ji's help, he shouted and asked if he was talking about the superpower of healing. Tao Hualing was scared and said in her mind that this was the first time she had seen Yugue react so violently. She wondered if that was the reason he didn't want to escape alone. Jin Ji's father suddenly began to laugh out loud, and his laughter seemed crazy. Yugue asked him what he was laughing at, and did he really do all this in order to help his daughter awaken her ability? But the girl's father, covering his mouth, replied that he was laughing at the fact that, having such a field of vision, Yugoi sees only one thing. With a sneer, he asked if this was just stupidity on the part of the main character, or something else. He added that in fact he had known the truth for a long time, but deep down he did not want to accept it. A demon approached the sad Yugoi from behind and managed to wrap his arms around him, which frightened Tao Hualing. When she shouted for the main character to pay attention, it was already too late, because the demon's hands were on the guy's face. The blonde closed the main character's eyes and said that he didn't have to listen if he didn't want to. Yugoi stood motionless in place, and his eyes were still covered by the demon's paws. While the protagonist couldn't move, Jin's body remained still and she was chained on the chair. The demon girl grinned wickedly and approached Jin Ji and said that he could leave it to her. The demon with red eyes came close to the girl and was going to do something to her. Tao Hualing was very wary and screamed and asked what the demon had done to Yugoi. When she wanted to fly up to the demon to stop her, the insidious demoness struck her. Jin Ji's father's gaze at that moment was serious, and at the same time cold-blooded towards what was happening. Yugoi, in the girl's body, screamed at the top of his voice in pain, and the girl herself was sweating profusely. Jin Ji's wily father wondered if it was a rejection reaction that had triggered it. He waved his hand to his subordinates and said that in this case, he would have to wait a little longer. Yugoi came close to Jin Ji and touched her shoulder on which there was an unknown liquid. The girl asked him to leave in a tired voice, but the main character silently took her hand. He looked into her eyes while holding her hand and said that he needed her body for a little while longer. The insidious demoness tried to attack him, but Yugoi managed to deftly dodge her blow. He closed his eyes and concentrated deeply so that he could take advantage of the deep immersion. Jin Ji's eyes opened wide, sweat began to flow down her face, and she breathed heavily for the first few minutes. Yugoi could not understand how she took on that form, and if not for the help of Tao Hualing, she would have been able to regain control of her body. Jin Ji's father adjusted his glasses and asked the main character in a calm tone if he had already returned. Yugoi, in the girl's body, looked sternly into the man's eyes and asked him to speak faster, since he had little time. The insidious blonde man in a medical gown snapped his finger and smiled slyly, as if he was planning something. He stood up from his burgundy chair and said in a calm tone that he was a doctor and a father. He also added that whether Yugoi believes it or not, he has not killed a single person in his entire life. The main character in Jin Ji's body asked why he should believe what he says. The girl's father used a laser pointer because he was going to explain the situation to the guy. A digital board appeared in front of Yugoi, and the man said that there was scientific research data. He began to say that since ancient times, the murderers in the Goldstein family have always, without exception, been only women. Jin Ji's father said with a little regret that the curse had been inherited in this generation. He told the protagonist that the body he is in is actually named Wuji Goldstein. Lawyer Meng, meanwhile, was looking at the time on her phone, and it was 15 minutes to 12 in the afternoon. Her white cape blew easily in the wind, and he continued to wait for the main character, who was late for the meeting. The girl looked around, hoping to finally see Yugoi, but he was nowhere to be seen. She said that he had made her wait for more than 2 hours, and if it had been another man, she would not have waited any longer. Meng was surprised, but another man really came, and in her thoughts she called Yugoi not so hopeless. She smiled and asked manager Jiang what brought him here, to which he replied that it was Yugoi's order. He said that a few days ago you instructed him to replace him if he did not get in touch. Jiang handed over the flash drive and said that it contained the data she needed, and assured that there would be enough of it. But before giving her the flash drive, he said that first she must do one last favor for Yugoi. Jiang said that he needed her to use all her powers and help him smuggle Yuya's younger sister. His words interested Lawyer Meng, and she quietly asked what was the reason for all this. Manager Jiang replied that the reason was that Yugoi suspected something related to his sister Yu Meng. Thoughts about his beloved sister always tormented the main character, because he really missed her. Manager Jiang added that the young man suspects that she has become the target of a demon who steals the dead. He explained that this so-called curse was never some kind of superpower, it was something more ancient. Later, after the advent of alchemy, people from generation to generation began to look for a clue to break the curses of the Goldstein family. But no one knows what questions sparked their pursuit of knowledge, and why only women suffer. By the time the research passed into the hands of Father Jean, countless victims and erroneous conclusions had already accumulated. He said that under his leadership, they would put an end to the mystery, which would allow him to take all the laurels for himself and become the greatest. Yugui asked in what direction he was conducting research, to which the man replied that in gene modification. He said with a proud smile that he had never hidden this in his life, and asked what the main character thought about this. Yugui was cool and remained silent, carefully considering his words. Jin Ji's father continued to talk about primitive myths and religious rituals. He said that in theory, this mutation is a problem at the material level, and should be reflected in the structure of the genes. The man said that he would dare to guess that Yugui did not have any kindred feelings for Jin Ji from the very beginning. The main character said that he was just using her, and she still remained just a product of an experiment for her. The girl's father clapped him and asked if he was happy with the story and if they could talk about cooperation. Yugui emotionlessly asked the man what kind of cooperation he wanted to talk about. The main character confidently stated that as long as he can save Jin Ji, he will agree to any price. The girl's father lowered his glasses and said that this was wonderful and he would tell him his plan. He said that as he understood, Yu longs to take possession of his daughter's ability, which takes away life force from a person. Father said that to some extent, with this curse it is actually possible to achieve an effect similar to healing. He asked Yugui if he really needed this ability to save someone who was very important to him. The main character in his thoughts admitted that he was right, because initially he came with the goal of saving Xiao Meng, but later he wanted to help Jin Ji. By and large, there is no difference in the behavior of her father and the young man, and Yugui is even more hypocritical, which only makes him worse. Tao Hualing did not know what was happening to the main character, and looked at his back in surprise. Jin Ji's father told him that he should know that those under the curse often live like ordinary people. One such example was the life of a small and sweet girl, Jin Ji, who one day looked out the window. She saw her teacher Ardalik, who was communicating with her favorite head maid. The father added that only if certain conditions are met will the curse take effect. He was going to give an example for the main character, recalling his daughter's behavior in childhood. The man said that, for example, a sudden mood swing, and voila, the hidden second personality has already taken control of the body. He also said that the hidden person retains all the memories of the murders she committed. The man added that it is usually very difficult for the owner of the body to resist the hidden personality. But despite all this, Jin Ji's father said that the arrival of the main character changed the situation for the better. Yugui said that he was coming out, so he wanted to use his consciousness to suppress the violent personality who was out for blood. The hero said that even without talking about whether he will succeed, there is another problem: his consciousness cannot constantly be in her body. Jin Ji's father asked the young man why he couldn't, as if he was planning something. Tao Hualing, as well as Yugui, became wary and she wondered what the man meant. With an intimidating look, the girl's father asked the guy if he had just said that he would agree to any price. He also asked why he should not remain in this mortal body to exist as part of Jin Ji's consciousness. The father said that he would continue to use suggestion, and over time their consciousnesses would merge and form one new one. He said that Yugui would be able to use Jin Ji's body with her ability to save the person he wanted. Tao Hualing excitedly asked the main character what would happen to him in reality if he did what the man said. Yugui bowed his head and asked what she thought would happen to the diver if he couldn't get to the surface. Tao Hualing became worried because she realized that he would drown and said that he could not agree to this. Yugui knew that he would not agree, because if the truth about the abilities was like this, then they would not be able to heal Xiao Meng, so there was no point in it. The hero answered the man that all this sounded extremely unprofitable, and he would receive too little for his help. The young man said that although the man talked about cooperation, he actually did not intend to leave him the right to choose. Jin Ji's father said he administered mind-numbing drugs to her for several years. The main character, in the body of a shackled girl, sat on a chair, silently watching the actions of the enemy. He smiled insidiously and said that he did not think that the main character would be able to resist in any way. One of the insidious villain's subordinates prepared a syringe with a green injection to inject into Jin Ji. But Yugui was not afraid at all, and smiled and said that they would see, because there is something that her father does not know. The main character in Jin Ji's body jumped up and began to walk quickly towards the enemy. The girl's father became wary and ordered his subordinates to immediately grab the girl before she hurt anyone. The subordinates in yellow biohazard suits immediately took up their weapons, intending to neutralize the target. Each of the armed guards loaded their rifles and pistols, taking aim at their target. All guns began firing at the target, but the agile Jin Ji took cover behind a chair, making it difficult to aim at her. With a sharp movement, she grabbed one of the guards, twisting his arm and thereby knocking out the pistol. Jin Ji looked at her father with her bottomless eyes, and Yugui was about to tell him something. He confidently said that this was their initial contribution to their future cooperation. 3 hours ago, the charming maid was riding in the elevator, doing her job as usual. Arriving on the second floor, she continued to roll the food cart in front of her. She quietly and slowly wheeled the food cart down the dimly lit hallway of the building. The little blue bird was sitting on the maid's shoulder, and in her body was Tao Hualing, who was happy about the success of the plan. The girl did not know what the maid would do next, but she hoped that it would help Yugui. The security camera in the hallway was pointed directly at the maid, but that didn't stop her. The maid continued to roll the cart forward along the corridor, where a left turn awaited her. The blue bird hiding behind the girl's hair suddenly flew up from her shoulder. The maid also hid some abilities, and at that very moment they disappeared from the camera. The charming girl called the bird strange and rushed forward with a sharp movement. She found herself in the right room, namely the warehouse of bioprotection suits, and took off her dress. Someone started knocking on the warehouse door, which alerted the maid and Tao Hualing, who was in the body of a bird. The girl decided to take it upon herself and distract those who came while the maid was stealing the suit. The two guards did not understand what was happening and where the bird came from in the room. Tao Hualing's action bought time for the maid, and she was grateful to the bird for her help. Yugui in Jin Ji's body continued to cope perfectly with the enemy, neutralizing them one by one. The girl's father said in his thoughts that her body and mind were not inhibited, but had been restored to a normal state. The fighting technique seemed very familiar to the man, which could not help but alert him at that moment. Jin Ji's father's subordinates in yellow biohazard suits laid down on the ground one after another. The father became nervous and wondered in his mind if it was really her, and if he had not explained to her the seriousness of the situation. At one point, the man just turned around and began to confidently walk away, without saying anything. Jin Ji's eyes opened wide and red, and the desire to kill became even stronger. The blonde in the black robe used one of her abilities to pull Jin Ji's father. Yugui, in the girl's body, struggled with the unbearable desire to kill, while she also attracted the girl herself. In his mind, the protagonist wondered if they shouldn't figure out a way to escape from here first. Jin Ji was turned upside down and clenched her teeth tightly while closing one eye. Yugui said in his thoughts that if they continued to fight for control of the body, they would only drive themselves into a trap. Jin Ji continued to dodge the shots of her opponents, who did not leave their target. The blonde asked why he came, and in this case, maybe he would simply transfer control of the body to her. She said that Jin Ji did not have what he was looking for and asked why he was here. This question worried the main character himself, and at that moment he wondered why he was still here. Yugui bowed his head thoughtfully and said to himself that he only came for healing for his sister Xiao Meng. Now that the mental state has been restored, he and Tao Hualing can come out of deep immersion at any time. But he was still worried about what would happen to Jin Ji if he left now. Yugui understood that she would no longer have any opportunity to leave the path of the killer. In his eyes was Jin Ji, who walked along the path of blood, and her ages were different. In the fight against him, the girl's second personality only becomes stronger, and she drowns in blood. Yugui suggested that it was his actions that led to this outcome of events, and he still hopes for her salvation. Suddenly, several loud shots from a pistol were heard, which hit the ears hard. Jin Ji screamed in pain as she was the one being shot at and could no longer resist. Two people in biohazard suits grabbed her hands and asked a colleague to quickly administer the medicine. The bloody version of Jin Ji whispered in Yugui's ear that this was his last chance, so he needed to decide. She asked him to think about the one he wanted to save and asked if he really wanted to stay here forever. One of the armed men in a yellow suit placed his hand on Jin Ji's shoulder. Yugui closed his eyes and raised his head up, as if about to take a desperate step. Two men continued to hold the exhausted Jin Ji, while the third gave commands to the others. Tao Hualing was worried and surprised by the protagonist's action, and Jean was still unconscious. Yu Gue just turned around and asked Tao to go in a low voice, and did not say anything else. But still, he desperately told her that there was nothing more they could do here and all their efforts were in vain. The bloody version of Jean Ji approached the still young girl and began to probe every centimeter of her body. She got very close to her younger version and took advantage of the deep dive. The deep dive was successful and Jean Ji's eyes seemed to light up, and she herself thanked the Lord for this. Suddenly, when one of the men was about to administer the injection, the girl began to struggle. She broke free from the hands of the other guards and made a sharp jerk forward to prevent herself from being detained. Bloody Jean Ji's eyes emitted a red light, and she said sternly that they sacrificed themselves. Human blood was everywhere, and the girl said that it was time to celebrate the birth of a full-fledged one. The last of the guards in the yellow biohazard suit fell to the floor, bloodied. Meanwhile, the situation in the hospital was also quite turbulent as the transport of Xiao Meng's body was being arranged. The wheels of the medical gurney were spinning non-stop across the floor of the medical facility. The stomping of people was loud, because they had to walk at a fast pace, since there was little time. Manager Jiang walked ahead and inspected the situation, while Lawyer Meng and armed guards walked behind. The manager said that they needed to go there immediately, and on the gurney lay an unconscious Xiao Meng. Suddenly, everyone involved in transporting the patient stood in a stupor and looked ahead warily. From around the corner in the corridor a foot in a black shoe could be seen, which stopped Manager Jiang. It turned out that Nurse Jean Ji was standing around the corner and asked if it was possible to take away a serious patient. With a smile, she added whether it was possible to do this without the consent of the head nurse. Manager Jiang was very nervous and sweat started running down his face as the situation was tense. Lawyer Meng was equally tense because she didn't know what they should expect next. Nurse Jean Ji smiled sweetly at them, but that didn't make the situation any less tense. Behind the cute nurse was a bloody version of her, eager to kill. The bloody girl repeated the sound of the clock and asked if he could hear her now. She said threateningly that there was no point in hiding, since she knew what door he was behind. In her hands was a bloody sharp knife, and again repeating the sound of the clock, she said that it was just a game. Jean Ji's face was covered in someone's blood, and with a terrifying smile, she said that there was no need to run away, because she could smell it. She stood in one place, and drops of someone's blood flowed from the blade and hands and fell to the floor. Jean Ji looked into the distance of the corridor, realizing that very soon she would deal with her main goal. The girl smiled eerily and said that her father's time had finally come. From the CCTV footage, one could see a maid in a yellow suit escorting Jean Ji away. The girl's father hid in his office and reviewed every fragment of the video. At the end of the video, only 2 guards in yellow suits remained, lying unconscious. He said that people without one of the chromosomes clearly lack the ability to think logically and make smart decisions. The system asked him if he really wanted to run a full isolation system, but quite unexpectedly, a knife was put to Jean Ji's father's throat, which greatly alarmed him. He carefully turned around and saw the maid holding a knife at his throat, which also alerted him. The girl asked him to let Jean Ji go because she was not guilty of anything. The man smiled slyly and said that it was possible, and the maid's gaze at that moment was with pain. He sternly asked her whether she had ever thought about those whom Jean Ji would kill. The girl continued to hold the knife to his throat, and the man said that in the future these could be the same innocent people. He reached for a sharp combat knife lying on the table and stuck it straight into his hand. More blood flowed across the table, and Jean Ji's father snapped his finger and used the blue beard technique. He looked at the black-haired girl and said that she was still as stupid as she was before. The man mockingly said that as soon as she removed the knife from his neck, she immediately became a puppet. But at that very moment the maid's behavior surprised the man and made him fall into a stupor. She stammered a little with excitement, but began to say that they were innocent, but there was something connected with Jean Ji. The girl said that Jean was her daughter and remained silent for the next few minutes. At that very moment, Jean Ji herself stood at the door of the room, holding a bloody knife in her hands. She released the bloody knife from her hands, which at that second freely fell to the floor and stained it with blood. The black-haired maid turned her attention to the girl standing in the doorway. Jean Ji's father looked at her in a stupor, but continued to remain silent. Blood flowed down the girl's hands, dripping onto the floor, and she herself asked what it meant. Jinji asked what the daughter meant, and the maid lowered her gaze to the floor, while the father was simply serious. The girl's mother immediately struck her father with a sharp movement, taking him by surprise. Jinji could not believe that the maid was really her mother, and the mother herself simply said that now everything would be fine. But the girl stood in a stupor for several minutes, not knowing how to react to all this. Tears flowed down her cheeks, which she immediately wiped away and continued to think silently. Jinji stamped her feet nervously, still remaining silent. Suddenly, the girl's father fired a loud shot from a pistol, which he was holding with blood-stained gloves. Jinji's eyes were shocked at that moment, and she looked into the eyes of the maid who was her mother. The girl's father aimed accurately, so he did not miss, and the bullet hit the maid right in the back. Holding the gun, he smiled and said that she had won, truly acknowledging her victory. He said that she managed to get rid of his control over her body, but she herself so naively turned her back on him. The man asked if she didn't know that he wouldn't kill an object important for research, and Jinji was in a panic. My father once thought that there was no problem in the world that could not be solved scientifically, but now he sees that he was wrong. He said that this problem was incurable human stupidity, and the maid was dying in Jinji's arms. The girl panicked and cried. She didn't know what to do, because her mother was rapidly bleeding. Finally, she asked Jinji to forgive her with difficulty, because she remembered too late. At that very moment she closed her eyes and her head fell back, indicating her death. Jinji was shocked, but said that she would not let her die so easily. Blood flowed down the girl's cheek, and she began to move her lips closer to her mother's lips. In her thoughts, she said that she would allow her to live forever in her body, and first those who deserve to die must die. Jinji's father was still holding the gun and was very surprised by what was happening. The girl continued to hold her mother in her arms and said that they would return together to this garden of sins. The father was not going to give her a chance to survive, and decided to shoot his own daughter. The fact that he pointed the gun did not frighten Jinji at all, and she calmly looked into his eyes. Dropping the gun from his hands, he said that he did not know how the fourth glance did it, but she and her mother were no longer under his control. He said that he read few fairy tales, otherwise how would he have come up with such a code word? The man added that in the finale the young wife of the blue beard went against her own husband. And with Rapunzel, everything was also predetermined a long time ago according to the plot of the fairy tale he was talking about. At the end, Jinji's father said that Rapunzel will escape from the tower according to the plot of the fairy tale about Bluebeard. A strong storm began, thunder roared loudly, and lightning struck several times a minute. Tao Hualing screamed from the water because she was scared and asked Yu Gui what was happening. The main character tried to keep a cool mind and said that everything was about to collapse. He also said that next time deep diving would be closed to Jinji. Tao Hualing and Yu Gui were covered by the wave, but after some time they still managed to surface. The main character straightened his hair and only told the girl in a serious voice that they needed to go. Meanwhile, there were many police cars near the Xiaoqing District Hospital, and a helicopter was patrolling over the hospital itself. The journalist said she was in a hospital in Xiaoqing District, where police had already begun an investigation. Manager Jiang was being carried on a gurney, and the reporter said that he seemed to be seriously injured. The journalist asked the manager if it was true that the bandits who committed the attack were valuable employees of the hospital. At the end, she asked one last question, whether the women taken hostage were employees of his hospital. Meanwhile, Lawyer Meng was completely tied up and had a bandage on her face, and she was just beginning to come to her senses. The rain was dripping on the girl, and she herself panicked greatly when she realized that she was tied up. She began to struggle with all her might and turned her attention to the left, where someone's silhouette could be seen. Behind the white curtain a woman could be seen doing something with the hair of the same girl. The wind from the window blew light snow-white curtains, and a bright beam of light entered the room. Jinji was wearing a wine dress, and sitting on a chair was Xiao Meng, who was doing her hair. The girl with orange eyes looked tiredly and desperately at the floor, silently waiting for her hair to be done. Jinji touched her shoulders and asked her to wait a second, to which the girl only remained silent. She herself went to the bathroom, where Lawyer Meng was lying, who was raging and disturbing her. Jinji pulled back the curtain and saw a tied-up girl who raised her legs up and held a shoe in her hands. The charming blonde calmly asked if she could stop shaking the air and be quiet. Lawyer Meng was sweating with excitement and hoped that Jin Ji would free her from her shackles. The charming blonde seemed to look with pity at the girl who so wanted to free herself. She took off her bandage, and Meng asked since she had just bathed and changed Xiao Meng, as if she was next. But Jin Ji only calmly told her that Xiao was special and she didn't need a bath, because she was already clean. She pushed Lawyer Meng to the floor and said that women like her, no matter how bright and beautiful they dress. She said that their souls would remain just as dirty, and the lawyer was still tied up. The bound girl silently looked around the room, in particular Xiao Meng, who lowered her gaze to the floor. The girl asked Jin Ji if all these sleeping beauties were really her collection. Beautiful girls looked perfect in Jin's collection, one of them was a charming blonde. The nurse herself asked if Lawyer Meng agreed that all these girls were cute. The lawyer said that in fact she was not so bad at heart and suggested that she think again. Her words only angered Jin Ji, and she immediately ran up to the frightened, tied-up girl. She grabbed the lawyer's face and said intimidatingly that she didn't understand at all how they were different from her. Jin Ji scratched the girl's thigh and called her profit-seeking, greedy, self-righteous, following the rules of a man's world. She said that the girl is no different from the waitresses, and her life is not even suitable as a nutrient for Xiao Meng. Lawyer Meng kept a cool head and said that she seemed to understand something. Looking into Jin Ji's eyes, she said that it turns out that the demon killer is her, and the demon corpse snatcher is also her. It turns out that in order to prevent the bodies of girls with soul loss syndrome from returning to their families, she took them and hid them at home. The lawyer also realized that in order to maintain their lives, Jin hunted for dirty and low-spirited girls. She asked if it was because life force could be transferred from someone of the same gender, but Ji replied that they were simply disgusting to her. Running a sharp claw along the wall, she was going to explain to the lawyer what she meant. Jin Ji said that some people are happy but don't love themselves, in which case, why not let her love them? She began to think about who Meng's power would suit, but the girl said that she had more problems with her head than he thought. Jin Ji asked with interest who she was talking about and clarified whether it was Jiang Qi who had told her all this. Lawyer Meng smirked and said that she might not like what she had to say. She asked if Jin Ji had exalted herself too much and said that her love was actually a one-sided projection of feelings. Meng asked why she decided to save all the patients with soul loss syndrome. She also said that at best, this is equivalent to the attitude of a child towards his toys, but these feelings are far from love. The same Xiao Meng, at the last moment before falling asleep, thought about someone who cherishes her, for example a brother, who is ready to do anything for her. The tied-up lawyer Meng provocatively said that Jin Ji is nobody to her and they don't even know each other. The charming blonde turned around and said that she simply did not understand anything about it. Meng asked what made her stoop to this level. Did her parents really not teach her how to express emotions? These words completely angered Jin Ji, and she screamed at the top of her voice that she simply did not understand anything. Out of anger, she grabbed Meng, who was provoking her, by the throat and lifted her up from the floor. The girl sensed the poisonous gas in the room, but still kept a cool mind. She looked into Jin Ji's bloody eyes and told herself that she would hold out for a minute since she had antibodies. But an ordinary person would not last 30 seconds without antibodies, so her chances of survival were slightly greater. Jin Ji's eyes filled with rage and the desire to kill more and more every second. Meng looked at Xiao Meng sitting silently and realized that without antibodies she could live for 30 seconds. At one point, the bloody Jin Ji stopped strangling the girl and simply rushed away. She covered her mouth to prevent the poisonous gas from affecting her, and Meng began to fall to the floor. Jin Ji grabbed Xiao Meng with a sharp movement, after which they immediately jumped out of the window. She held the girl tightly in her arms, breaking the glass window with her confident jump. Lawyer Meng assessed the situation and realized that it was not poisonous gas, but just smoke. She leaned helplessly against the wall and began to look out the window, thinking about what had happened. Meng said that instead of relaying information to her superiors, she chose to cooperate with police and it saved her life. She looked out the window and asked Jin Ji for forgiveness, because she only said all this to anger her, and takes it back. At least when it comes to Xiao Meng, she cannot deny her sincere feelings and strong intentions. Lawyer Meng thought about the outcome of the situation for a while, and realized something. A helicopter flew over the building, and she said that everything happened exactly as Yugui had expected. It was late at night on the street, and a police car with flashing lights was parked outside one of the buildings. Tao Hualing was lying on her bed in a white nightie, finally trying to fall asleep. But her sleep was prevented by obsessive thoughts and how much she worried about the main character. She recalled how Yugui left the house, telling her that she was the only one besides him who would know who was behind all this. Tao Hualing told herself that this would only increase the feeling of anxiety, and her intuition had always been accurate. Insomnia defeated the girl and she was just sitting on the bed, hugging the pillow, but suddenly the phone rang. The girl immediately took the phone and picked up the receiver, and it turned out that Wang Nanchao was calling her. Tao Hualing talked to her uncle and said that she herself could not help unless the police helped her. The girl was very worried and her anxious thoughts only intensified as she looked out the window in frustration. Meanwhile, Yugui shook hands with Lawyer Meng while in the helicopter and asked where Xiao Meng was. The girl said with a smile that she was risking herself for him, in fact, and he could take care of her first. She said that Jin Ji took her with her, but the police even sent an airship to help in the search, so they couldn't get far. Yugui asked if she could help him negotiate with the police so that they would trust him to negotiate with the criminal. Lawyer Meng said that based on their short conversation with her, she did not think that a man could replace Xiao Meng for her. But still, she said that she could ask, but first she had to wait until the police cornered Jin Ji. Wang Nanchao sat on the roof with a sniper rifle and said in his thoughts that she was a demon killer and a kidnapper rolled into one. He also said in his thoughts that when working in the police, you don't have to get used to high-profile cases, but such madness has never happened. At one point he told himself that it was enough to think and he needed to focus on the goal. Wang Nanchao knew that the hostage's safety was at stake, and hoped that he had not yet lost his grip and ability with him. It was already deep night on the street, and the policeman was patient and waited for the target. At one moment, he saw Jin Ji quickly running forward with a sleeping Xiao Meng in her arms. In her thoughts, she told herself that she needed to quickly get rid of everyone who wanted to interfere with her. But quite unexpectedly for her, she found herself surrounded by police who were already loading their weapons. The second group of policemen loaded assault rifles and were ready to shoot to kill. Jin Ji was surrounded by police and ordered to stay put, release the hostage, and put her hands up. The girl immediately realized that there were 15 of them, and after the first shot she decided to kill the 3 policemen near the stairs. The main character, Yugui, who wanted to talk to her, walked up the steps to Jin Ji. The blonde hugged Xiao Meng even tighter and looked at the guy, remaining calm. Yugui asked if it was right that the reason for this situation was only because she wanted to protect his sister. Jin Ji asked if he wanted to risk his sister's life and whether he thought she would do something to her or not. Yugui lowered his head and said that he knows, so he is more than sure, and Xiao Meng is not her friend from the past. After these words, Jin Ji fell into a stupor, and her pupils widened greatly in surprise. She hugged Xiao Meng even closer and angrily asked him what he could possibly know about this. Yugui calmly told her that his sister was as innocent as she was when she fell victim to one curse. Jin Ji became furious and her eyes turned completely red, and she screamed and asked the main character not to come near. Out of anger, she swung her hand and scratched his face, but in response to this, Yugui looked at her upset. He told her that if she wanted to leave, she could switch places with Xiao Meng and she could hurt him as much as she wanted. Yugui said that it was because of him that she took this tragic path, and for Jin Ji at that moment everything began to become clearer. She was deeply imbued with these thoughts and wondered if it was really him. Her mind was filled with all sorts of memories where she felt someone's presence. Wang Nanchao with a sniper rifle saw that the target was distracted and immediately took aim. He understood that he needed to do this now, otherwise there might not be another chance. The policeman aimed directly at Jin Ji's forehead, about to finally pull the trigger. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, he heard a strange sound that distracted him. Wang Nanchao received a phone call from home, which caused him to be distracted from his task. He was surprised, because he had specially switched his mobile phone to silent at this time, and the call could only come from home. He also understood that it was Tao Hualing who could have called, who should have been asleep long ago. The policeman was greatly distracted by the phone call, and he pulled the trigger of the sniper rifle. But as it turned out later, the sight at that moment was on the chest of the unconscious Xiao Meng. Manager Jiang Qi was still wearing a breathing mask and was unconscious. Blue-eyed lawyer Meng stood silently in one position, not making any sounds. Wang Nanchao's eyes widened in shock as he realized that he had taken an unwanted shot. Tao Hualing was very worried and continued to try to call her uncle. Yu Gui looked at Jin Ji, who stood silently in one place after the shot. Her eyes were still very red, but her gaze itself was empty after the shot. Wang Nanchao told himself in his mind that the scene was still the same, and he was still a helpless observer in it. Thanks to the time delay, he saw everything clearly, but could not understand why Jin Ji covered the hostage with herself. After the shot, she put Xiao Meng on the ground, and without letting go of her, she bled silently. The police immediately shouted that the object had been defeated, and therefore it was possible to free the hostage. But Yu Gui, who had drops of blood on his face, did not allow them to do this and shouted and asked them to stop. With great regret in his eyes, he asked Jin Ji why she did this. The bloody girl sat on her knees and tried to find an answer to Yu Gui's question. Every time she remembers a dark period of the past, it seems to her that her memories diverge in different directions. But still, Jin Ji said that in one of them she saw this face, and its owner slept with her and died in her arms. And whenever these memories overtake her in a dream, strange emotions always come with them, but she does not like this dream. Thus, without realizing it, the 11th witch acted very selfishly. The bleeding Jin Ji began to approach the lips of the sleeping Xiao Meng with her lips. The 11th witch selfishly imprisoned her loved one in a dream world, and the end of the house's curse was a tragedy. Therefore, she decided to replace the princess with herself, return her to the future, and trusting it to the not yet handsome prince. And with a calm smile, the 11th witch Jin Ji fell into eternal sleep, while Yu Gui hugged his beloved sister Xiao Meng.